Hi everyone, please subscribe to my channel. Blood Immortal Venerable. See playlist for other chapters and novels. I do not translate the novels. Credits goes to original translator and author of the novel. I only make it as an audiobook so it would be easier to just listen while doing other things. Credits goes to the author of the novel. I convert stories to audiobook for mental health, for multitasking purpose, for accessibility and time saving. Listening to audiobook is also beneficial for people who have disability. It improves our listening skills and improve our English comprehension, vocabulary and other things. So, thank you for listening. Thank you and thank you very much for your support. Chapter 3381, 3 Eyes. Zen even reached out to touch his body. The statue that sat upright was exactly the same as his own corporeal body, though it didn't move, of course. Primeval Lord of Heaven, is this just a statue? Zen asked, slightly hesitant and overtaken with curiosity. No, replied the Primeval Lord of Heaven, shaking his head. Then what is this? Is it my real body? How could that be? Zen asked, even more taken by what he saw. Not exactly, the Primeval Lord of Heaven said with a faint knowing smile. As the most wise and knowledgeable human being, he had a deep understanding of stage 32 of the other shore as well as of the eternal scroll painting. Think of it as an anchor, he said. Let's call it a sort of anchor body. An anchor, you say? Zen stared pensively. Yes, the Primeval Lord of Heaven confirmed with a smile. Think of us as a ship drifting. This anchor body fixes us here so we can receive power from external areas, namely, the power of the eternal realm. The power of the eternal realm? Zen's eyes glinted. Of course, he knew that eternal warriors of the eternal realm were very powerful, but he hadn't understood why. The Primeval Lord of Heaven recognized Zen's confusion. Suddenly, he asked, in your opinion, is there any difference between the bloodline of sun crows and the bloodlines of the ferocious beasts in the source world? The bloodline of sun crows and the bloodlines of ferocious beasts. Zen frowned and thought for a while. I think the difference is probably in their strength. Although the ferocious beasts are also capable of inheriting bloodlines, theirs won't increase their own strength very much, but the bloodline of sun crows is different. Then have you ever thought about why their blood power is so strong? The Primeval Lord of Heaven asked, smiling once more. Creatures in the source world could summon such great power because they relied on the other shore tokens on the other shore. However, this rule was broken by blood power. When Emperor Charm had used the 9 Sun World Destruction Thurgi or Eastern Emperor Tai had used the Golden Sword, their power hadn't come from any other shore token but their own bloodlines. So how can they unleash such power without using any other shore token? With the Primeval Lord of Heaven's hints, Zen now understood. Primeval Lord of Heaven, you mean, the Eternal Scroll Painting. They have obtained their bloodlines from the Eternal Scroll Painting. Zen had been wondering how Emperor Charm's and Eastern Emperor Tai's blood power could be so strong. So strong they were able to destroy a whole province with ease. Obviously, their blood power was much more powerful than other shore tokens. But both Eastern Emperor Tai and Emperor Charm were powerful seniors. Zen had thought perhaps they had used means he did not know of, so he hadn't thought too deeply about this question. But the Primeval Lord of Heaven's reminders helped Zen figure it out quickly. The 3 Purities Stone is an anchor that binds your real body here, so that at the same time, you may enter the Eternal Scroll Painting and obtain your own bloodline. The other end of your bloodline is connected to somewhere in the distant abstruse energy world, explained the Primeval Lord of Heaven. No wonder there is a vortex in both Eastern Emperor Tai's Golden Sword and Emperor Charm's sons. Zen said, nodding excitedly at this newfound revelation. The power of the abstruse energy world was connected to the Eternal Scroll Painting, and the power of the Eternal Scroll Painting was connected to the statues in the 3 Purities Stones. The statues were like anchors, closely connected to the Eternal Realm warriors. The blood power can be inherited, so the children of these powerful warriors of the Eternal Realm have it too. Zen appeared confused again. Putting himself aside, Yan had also obtained the Snake Goddess bloodline through the 6-pattern blood-storing seed, and could now use the shadow of Snake Goddess as an energy entity. Although Yan's shadow of Snake Goddess couldn't be compared with the actual Snake Goddess, she at least possessed the blood power. All creatures with the same bloodline have an invisible line that connects them to that powerful warrior of the Eternal Realm, the Primeval Lord of Heaven began. Therefore, using the blood-splitting technique, you can, quite ingeniously, kill all people with the same bloodline in a region by relying on that invisible line. Zen abruptly raised his eyebrows at the very mention of the blood-splitting technique. The members of the 9 Li race in the Divine Land had been killed by the Yellow Emperor guards using the blood-splitting technique. It was not until then that Zen had learned of the blood-splitting technique. the eternal scroll painting is not the only way to obtain the power of the abstruse energy world, is it? Zen asked. Theoretically, all kinds of power could come from the abstruse energy world, but the power obtained through the eternal scroll painting was far stronger than any ordinary power. Generally speaking, as long as some power was obtained through the eternal scroll painting, it could reveal the vortex that was connected to the abstruse energy world. Of course not, the primeval Lord of Heaven replied. The chaotic source spirits in your body is another way, just in the reverse direction. There are also some other shore tokens in stage 33 of the other shore that can achieve a similar effect. If that's the case and I enter the eternal scroll painting, will I obtain a new bloodline? Zen inquired. He already had two bloodlines in his body. One was the Chaos Ancient God's bloodline, and the other was Chiyu's. If he entered the eternal realm in the eternal scroll painting, he would obtain a third bloodline, and he thought that would be too many for him. Once you obtain a new bloodline, Chiyu's bloodline will disappear from your body, the primeval Lord of Heaven said matter-of-factly. Back in the times of the 77th civilization, Zia entered the eternal realm and my bloodline was removed from his body. I didn't know a bloodline could be replaced in the eternal scroll painting. Zen became looking forward to obtaining his blood power in the eternal scroll painting. When he withdrew from the second volume, he saw a group of another shore race coming over from not far off. They were almost the same as humans, except for the third eye on their foreheads. The man who led them possessed an extremely powerful aura, no weaker than Eastern Emperor Tair Yasamin. It was obvious he was a powerful warrior of the eternal realm. When Pierce and the others caught sight of them, they immediately walked up to them with smiles strewn across their faces. Bowing to the powerful warrior of the eternal realm, Pierce said, "Chief, seeing as you're leading your clansmen here in person, it must mean the Three Eyes race is not lacking in young talents." In stage 32 of the other shore, most races submitted to the element spirit race, while others were under the protection of the nihility race. However, in addition to these two camps, there were also other races that maintained a neutral position. In fact, these neutral races all pretty much agreed with the finale way, and were thus potential allies of the Oneness Sky Palace and the Pear Hill. That was the reason for Pierce's politeness. The chief nodded slightly, turned and waved his hand. This time, there will be 3 members of our Three Eyes race entering the eternal scroll painting. Of course I hope they can enter the eternal realm. His wave signaled the 3 members, who stood out from the rest of the group one at a time. The one walking in the front was the shortest and looked like a child. Zen stared at him for quite a while before he finally realized who he was. He was the three-eyed boy he had met in the dark region in stage 13 of the other shore. But this was not the dark region. As a creature in the dark region, how could the three-eyed boy have entered the light region? Chapter 3382, Help. When the three-eyed boy stepped forward, he saw Zen who stood at the side. Every human he met in the past were all in their soul forms on the other shore, except for the one he encountered when he had trained in stage 13. The three-eyed boy was well respected in their race because, over recent years, he was the most promising talent to become an Eternal Realm Master. Their race, known as the Three Eyes race, sent him to stage 13 after they discovered a large number of burning crystal mines there. They both wanted him to fight for the mines and hoped that he would get more training in real combats. The competition in stage 13 was exceptionally fierce. Both the Element Spirit race and the Nihility race had grabbed their shares of the pie, so the Three Eyes race would naturally have a hard time taking their cut. Fortunately, they had a good relationship with the giant ape in stage 13. Thus, they had more advantages over the other races with the giant ape's help. In the end, the powerful combination of the three-eyed boy and the giant ape continuously defeated the forces arranged by the Element Spirit race and the Nihility race in the Dark region. The black monkeys that was affiliated with the Nihility race suffered the most damage since the three-eyed boy and the giant ape slaughtered so many of their kind. As for the pig-faced monsters affiliated with the Element Spirit race, they pinned their hopes on something else instead, which was to produce a purified being. The purified being didn't exist in the Dark region of stage 13 back then. The pig-faced monsters' plan went smoothly until Elvinia had interrupted their leader Teague, and all their efforts went to waste. After that, Zen and Elvinia escaped from the Dark region, and the three-eyed boy never saw them again. Now that the three-eyed boy saw Zen again in stage 32, he realized that Zen was somehow familiar to him. But after Zen had passed through the Soul City and the Land of Bone Tribulation, his aura had changed tremendously. Therefore, it was difficult for the three-eyed boy to confirm his identity. At that moment, the leader of the Three Eyes race noticed the three-eyed boy's curious gaze towards Zen, so he asked, "Egan, do you know this human?" Instead of answering the leader's question, Egan turned to Zen and asked, "Have you ever been to the dark region in stage 13? Zen smiled and calmly replied, "Of course I have been there." Silence hung in the air for a while, then Egan's lips curved up into a smile. "Grandpa, I was once seriously injured in stage 13. It was this human who helped me heal my wounds at that time," he exclaimed. "I didn't expect that he would reach the Grand Plane stage in such a short time," he thought. He wasn't sure of Zen's identity at first because he knew that it was very difficult to ascend to the current stage where he was from stage 13. Those who were born in stage 32 like himself were the exception, but he couldn't believe that someone had passed through the lower stages so quickly. Their leader was utterly shocked as well. He stared at Zen and said in a deep voice, "As far as I know, it has only been 3 years since you went for training in stage 13. Am I right, Egan? So you mean to say that he ascended from stage 13 to stage 32 in only 3 years? The leader of the Three Eyes race was very surprised at such an achievement. "Pierce, is it true that it only took him 3 years? What a fast improvement, it's almost a miracle. It seems that the Oneness Sky Palace has discovered an extraordinary talent." The other members of the Three Eyes race behind the leader all remarked in awe. Although the Three Eyes race couldn't compare to the large races like the Element Spirit race and the Nihility race, they had a higher status than the Oneness Sky Palace in stage 32 and had a much stronger force. The reason the Oneness Sky Palace had gotten a foot in the door of stage 32 was because of the protection mechanism in the stage. If the current chaotic era had ended, Eastern Emperor Tai and Yasamine, the only 2 Eternal Realm Masters of the Oneness Sky Palace, weren't enough to protect their temple in stage 32. Therefore, the warriors of the Three Eyes race never expected that a weak force like the Oneness Sky Palace would have such an extraordinary junior. Zen's fast improvement even exceeded that of Eastern Emperor Tai. Just as the members of the Three Eyes race had yet to recover from shock, Egan suddenly said, "Grandpa, you are wrong. I met Zen 2 years after I entered stage 13. That was about a year ago." The people of the Three Eyes race immediately fell silent. They could not help but look Zen up and down once again. To ascend from stage 13 to stage 32 in only 1 year. How did the Oneness Sky Palace manage to find such an extraordinary talent? While the people of the Three Eyes race were stunned into silence, Pierce and the others of the Oneness Sky Palace felt overjoyed at their reaction. Of course, the people of Oneness Sky Palace knew Zen much better than the outsiders. They knew that his fast improvement was just one aspect of his many striking talents. The Oneness Sky Palace must have put a lot of efforts and resources into helping you improve, didn't they? The leader asked with a smile. Pierce wanted to deny what the leader said because he knew that Zen obtained all those resources through his own efforts. However, Zen answered before him and said, "That's right. I would have never reached the Grand Plane stage so quickly without the generous support and abundant resources the Oneness Sky Palace had given me. If the Oneness Sky Palace channeled all their resources to provide Zen with sufficient soul crystal and body-strengthening jades, then Zen's incredible achievement would seem somehow reasonable." As Zen expected, the warriors of the Three Eyes race sighed in relief at his answer. His explanation sounded easier for them to accept. The disciples of the Oneness Sky Palace don't have a physical form, just a soul on the other shore. You are a rare exception since you have entered the other shore with a physical body, so of course, they will do their best to train you, the leader of the Three Eyes race said with a smile. My grandson had obtained 4 Holy Soul imprints and 5 Bone Tribulation imprints a long time ago. He is the warrior with the most imprints in the history of our race. I believe that he will achieve a good ranking in the Eternal Scroll painting, he added. He shifted the topic to his grandson and forgot to ask Zen about the number of imprints he had obtained. Egan's childish face was full of confidence. Grandpa, I won't let you down, he assured. This young man from the Oneness Sky Palace has helped you a lot. After you have entered the Eternal Scroll painting, you must help him in return, the leader nodded and said. It will be my pleasure. Egan exclaimed and smiled at Zen. Thank you very much, Chief, Pierce said calmly and cupped his hands. At that point, the leader of the Three Eyes race cast a curious look at Pierce. The people of the Oneness Sky Palace were usually overjoyed if the Three Eyes race made them such a promise. However, Pierce was calm and composed when he expressed his gratitude. It seemed that his grandson's help didn't matter so much to him at all. Maybe I am just overthinking, he thought. He didn't know that although his grandson was talented enough to obtain 4 Holy Soul imprints and 5 Bone Tribulation imprints, it was nothing compared to Zen's achievements. They were not even on the same level. Once their discussion was over, Egan and the 2 other members of the Three Eyes race found a 3 Purities stone each. They used the light stones and entered the three purities stones to put their bodies and souls of light into them. Generally speaking, the soul and body of the creatures on the other shore were always together. 2 anchor bodies appeared on each of the three purities stones after they came out. One was their physical body, and the other was their soul. If they reached the eternal realm, the third anchor body would appear there as well. Soon enough, many other shore races also showed up and followed suit. All of them wanted to put their bodies and souls into the three purities stones before the first volume of the Eternal Scroll painting opened. Chapter 3383, The Violet Cloud Race. After all these races in stage 32 of the other shore had shown up, Zen realized there were a lot more here than he had originally thought. After all, the ruling civilizations usually built their own temples in stage 32 in the past. The regal Jade civilization had once developed and grown in stage 32 of the other shore, but they were unable to cope with the relentless chase and pestering of the Nihility race. They were left no choice but to enter a lower space and hide in the dark region of stage 13 of the other shore. The humans had been in a similar situation. The human beings, led by the primeval Lord of Heaven, were unable to contend with the element spirit race and were forced to flee into stage 33 of the other shore. As for the other humans, they hid in the creation myth temple of stage 17 of the other shore. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. In the distance, black cubes glided along the bronze ground like flying carpets. From the black cubes jumped many creatures as slender as bamboo sticks. They were tall and strong, with skin of cyan purple. Their faces were long, like that of horse, and they looked very arrogant. They lined up in a row and 3 more warriors stepped down from the black cubes. Their aura was extraordinary as they were all Eternal Realm masters. What race are they? They actually have 3 warriors at the Eternal Realm. Zen asked curiously and astounded. That's the Violet Cloud race. They used to be one of the top 5 ruling civilizations, Pierce said in a low voice. But now they have pledged allegiance to the element spirit race. Even one of the top 5 ruling civilizations has pledged loyalty to the element spirit race. Zen said disgustedly, shaking his head. He had learned from the primeval Lord of Heaven that in stage 32, all the races, except for the Three Eyes race and few others that followed the finale way and remained neutral, had joined the element spirit race or the Nihility race. Even with this knowledge, he couldn't help but sigh in disappointment when he saw it with his own eyes. The entire Violet Cloud race is pitiful and ungrateful. They have joined the element spirit race but they aren't in an important position. It's been so many years and they still haven't progressed their strength and development, said the primeval Lord of Heaven, his voice rife with contempt. Does the Violet Cloud race hold a grudge against the human race? Zen asked. After our human race entered stage 32 of the other shore, under the leadership of our human ancestor, we were able to stand up to the element spirit race. Many other shore races and civilizations then joined us. The Violet Cloud race is the 62nd civilization, even older than us, and was once the most solid ally of our human race, the primeval Lord of Heaven mused, lost in thought of the past. Back then the Grand Plain stage was not as lifeless as it was now. Many ruling civilizations sprung up there and developed into powerful and prosperous races. The human race continued upholding the finale way. Even if the 77th chaos had failed, the human race and the other civilizations on the other shore still continued firmly supporting the finale way. At the human race's peak in the Grand Plain stage, there was even a hint of a possibility they might be able to defeat the element spirit race. It was at this most critical moment that they were betrayed by several ruling civilizations, including the Violet Cloud race. After the human race failed, the finale way was gradually neglected by others. Now, any forces that once supported the finale way had either disappeared or chosen to side with the element spirit race or the Nihility race. Either that or they had chosen an existence like that of the Three Eyes race, which remained neutral and achieved nothing. The Violet Cloud race once had such a relationship with our race. Zen muttered. Too much had happened during 1,000 chaotic eras. Just then, the Violet Cloud race suddenly began making moves on both sides, enveloping an area of 3 purities stones. As they did so, one of their Eternal Realm warriors yelled, "All souls and physical bodies sitting on the 3 purities stones in this area should be removed." Several warriors had already hung their souls and physical bodies on the 3 purities stones before the Violet Cloud race had gotten there, including Zen, Libby, and 3 members of the Three Eyes race. When the Eternal Realm warrior suddenly roared for them to remove their souls and physical bodies, everyone was confused. The leader of the Three Eyes race glared at the Eternal Realm warrior in displeasure and said, "You only need one of the 3 purities stones to enter the Eternal Scroll painting, and it doesn't matter which is used." Why do you ask us to remove the souls and physical bodies? The Eternal Realm warrior of the Violet Cloud race put his hands behind his back and with a sinister smile, said, "It doesn't matter which 3 purities stone is used to enter the Eternal Scroll painting, but the Eternal Realm warriors of our race have all chosen this area to keep our souls and bodies. No one else is allowed here." The sculptures around the 3 purities stones on the ground did indeed have slender and long figures. There was no doubt they belonged to the Violet Cloud race. Even so, their behaviors were petty and unreasonable. It did not matter whether they were the Element Spirit race or the Nihility race or anyone else, they had to choose a 3 purities stone at random. But the Violet Cloud warriors were domineering, and even though the others had already hung their souls and bodies on the stones, they still asked them to remove them. "What if we don't remove them?" the leader of Three Eyes race asked with anger flaring in his eyes. The three-eyed boy named Egan and the other members of the Three Eyes race were all furious. Another Eternal Realm warrior of the Violet Cloud race chuckled, "I seem to recall that the Three Eyes race doesn't do well with torture. If you do not want to remove them, you may try your luck and see what happens to you." The Three Eyes race could protect themselves within the Grand Plain stage. But if the Violet Cloud race attacked them with all their might, they would have a tough time dealing with it. This threat left most the members of the Three Eyes race feeling indignant, while Egan seemed understanding and even suggested, "Grandpa, we'd better remove our souls and bodies. We'd lose nothing by switching 3 purities stones." Under Egan's persuasion, their leader could only agree. Egan and the other 2 members of the Three Eyes race returned to the inner space of the second volume and took back the bodies hanging there. The Three Eyes race had chosen submission, and the other small races couldn't afford to offend the Violet Cloud race as well, and so obediently followed suit. Only Zen and Libby were left. One of them had placed the soul on the stone, and the other had put the body there. The Eternal Realm warrior of the Violet Cloud race glanced at the 2 3 purities stones and saw this. He turned around, stared at Pierce and ordered ferociously, "Why are the humans here? Remove them now." Both Pierce and Auden were unsure how to deal with this. They didn't want to offend these other shore races when Eastern Emperor Tai was not here. Zen on the other hand took the opportunity to stand up. "What if I don't remove it?" The people of the Violet Cloud race had never imagined the weak human race would refuse, especially in this round of chaos where the humans couldn't even enter the other shore with their physical bodies. All they could do was to put their souls into the stones. They were quite simply just unimportant characters. That was why when Zen spoke, it drew the eyes of all the Violet Cloud warriors. Several Eternal Realm warriors looked at Zen strangely when they noticed his physical body. Chapter 3384, No Longer Tolerant. Zen had caused quite a stir in the lower stages of the other shore, but very little information had been transmitted to stage 32 of the other shore. Although the Element Spirit race knew a lot about Zen, they wouldn't communicate any information about Zen with their subordinate races, which was why the members of the Violet Cloud race were all surprised to see his corporeal body. "Interesting," the powerful warrior of the Eternal Realm from the Violet Cloud race said, looking Zen up and down. "The truth of powerful holy body is forbidden in the current round of chaos, so your corporeal bodies should not have been able to enter here. How did you manage to do it, human?" "Why should I tell you?" Zen retorted. At this, several members of the Violet Cloud race rushed towards him, the one leading them looking menacing. "Human, it's an honor to be asked a question by Elder Hao. You'd better answer his question honestly." All the humans in the current round of chaos kept a low profile. Even a large number of Holy Soul Realm humans, including Pierce, in stage 32 of the other shore stayed out of the limelight. That was why the members of the Violet Cloud race weren't taking Zen seriously. "Or what?" Zen smiled. "Or," the member of the Violet Cloud race faltered, taken aback at Zen's confidence. The Three Eyes race feared the Violet Cloud race because the members of the Violet Cloud race had a number of means of torturing them. But the humans from the Oneness Sky Palace were still under the protection in the Grand Plain stage, and while this was so, the Violet Cloud race couldn't do anything to harm them. "Your alternative is that after this round of chaos, I will make sure that your Oneness Sky Palace disappears from the Grand Plain stage," Elder Hao of the Violet Cloud race said, his voice booming. This obvious threat drew the attention of all the remaining other shore creatures that were present. All the other shore creatures, including the members of the Three Eyes race, looked at Zen in surprise. They were also curious, wondering why a human of the Holy Soul Realm dared refute the Violet Cloud race, and thought that he was courting death. Pierce, who had been standing silently to the side for quite a while, suddenly burst into laughter. Pierce and Auden were the most powerful officials in the Oneness Sky Palace, second only to Eastern Emperor Tai and Yasmin. But they were filled with anger every time they entered stage 32 of the other shore, and each time, they had to swallow their anger and tolerate anything that came their way. They never dared compete with any other race on the other shore for the sake of the Oneness Sky Palace's long-term development. They always greeted the other shore races with broad smiles. When they explored the temples, they had to act according to the etiquette that these other shore races demanded. When the Violet Cloud race began to make things difficult for them, Pierce had thought about dealing with them in the usual manner. But on second thought, he realized that the Oneness Sky Palace and the Element Spirit race had already come to an open break since the Element Spirit race had trapped Eastern Emperor Tai and Yasmin. Since the disparity in strength was huge, begging for mercy didn't make sense. "Hello, Elder Hao of the Violet Cloud race," Pierce said, walking forward. "You're in the Eternal Realm, but you don't seem to have a working brain." "What did you say?" Hao's voice had been stern and cold before, and now, it sounded even colder. The other members of the Violet Cloud race stiffened as well. They didn't think a mere human soul was qualified to speak to a warrior of the Eternal Realm this way. Pierce was weaker than Hao, but he was a very sophisticated man. He had experienced everything in his lifetime so far. He said unhurriedly, "In the Source World, the Element Spirit civilization has attacked our Oneness Sky Palace several times, but they failed every single time. The Element Spirit race is our sworn enemy, and we have an irreconcilable hatred for them. Your Violet Cloud race is nothing but a mere vassal force of the Element Spirit race. If we surrender now, will you let the Element Spirit race let go of us?" The Violet Cloud race had joined the Element Spirit race, but they were not the strongest among the other shore races affiliated to the Element Spirit race. They had almost no say in the workings of the Element Spirit race. Pierce's remark successfully rendered Hao speechless. Hao's face trembled with rage as he roared, "You're courting death. Courting death. You're a powerful warrior of the Eternal Realm. So it will be easy for you to destroy me, a mere soul of light. Am I right?" Pierce retorted. Hao suddenly jumped, his tall body doing a flip in the air. A wide purple saber in his hand burst out a terrifying force, chopping down towards Pierce's head. Pierce didn't budge. He only looked at Hao coldly. The saber was just inches away from Pierce's forehead when it stopped abruptly. It had no effect at all. All the power it contained was erased by the rules in the Sanskrit light stage. Any battle on the bronze ground was meaningless. Hao knew this, but he had still attacked Pierce for two reasons. One was because he was angry, and the other, because he wanted to intimidate the Oneness Sky Palace. He put away his saber before threatening Pierce again. "I hope you will remember never to meet the members of our Violet Cloud race in the second volume. If you do, I will surely tear you into pieces. Let's go." Hao had just turned around to leave with his clansmen, when a voice rang out, "Wait." Zen slowly walked out of the crowd. The members of the Violet Cloud race turned to look at him rather coldly. They knew that even though they had spoken tough to the members of the Oneness Sky Palace, they could do nothing to them. The anger in their hearts had only multiplied, thanks to this. Their gazes were sharp as knives and they looked like they wanted to cut Zen to pieces. "I want to know which of you from the Violet Cloud race will enter the first volume of the Eternal Scroll painting," Zen said, smiling pleasantly. "Please show me mercy when you do." Zen wasn't really asking them to show mercy. This was simply another way to declare war. Hao's eyes lit up at Zen's words. He had almost forgotten that Zen could anchor his corporeal body on the Three Purities stone. And if he could anchor his soul too, he would be able to enter the Eternal Scroll painting. Very good. Walden, a member of the Violet Cloud race, walked out of the group. This time, the Violet Cloud race would send 6 members into the Eternal Scroll painting. Walden was the strongest of the 6. He had 10 imprints in all, 5 Holy Soul imprints and 5 Bone Tribulation imprints. This elevated his status in stage 32 of the other shore. Walden's eyes squinted as he smiled and said, "I'll keep it in mind, now that you mention it. I hope you won't disappoint me. Let me show you great mercy." Behind him stood the other 5 members of the Violet Cloud race, radiating unfriendliness. It was obvious that they were taking in everything about Zen, their common opponent. The members of the Three Eyes race were so astonished at what was happening, that they remained frozen in the places. "I understand that he once saved your life and that you want to repay him, Egan, but I think we should act within the limits of our abilities," the chief of the Three Eyes race whispered to Egan. "I know, Grandpa," Egan said helplessly. He knew that Zen must have extraordinary means, but he thought it was unwarranted on Zen's part to fight against the Violet Cloud race before the first volume of the Eternal Scroll painting was opened. Egan was more puzzled at the fact that the elders of the Oneness Sky Palace were doing the same thing as Zen had done. Though his grandfather had reminded him, because he was not ungrateful, he was still willing to give Zen a hand if his own safety could be assured. Chapter 3385, Samantha. The opening of the Eternal Scroll painting was an important event for all forces of Stage 32 of the other shore. Therefore, all the races on the other shore arrived ahead of time. Then, the allied races planned to strategize and cooperate together in the scroll painting. In the past few days, more and more races on the other shore had gathered at the location of the three purities stones. There was the extermination race that was stronger than the violet cloud race, the sickle race whose members had notably strange form, the delicacy race, and other races. However, the majority of the races in the chaos did not come. Aside from the Oneness Sky Palace, only the ear mice showed up. Of course, the ear mouse race didn't come for the Eternal Scroll painting. There was a preparation period of 10 days before the Eternal Scroll painting opened, and a large number of other shore creatures gathered at that time. They went there to do business. Meanwhile, Zen had a small argument with the Violet Cloud race, and then his physical body retreated from the other shore. He had to hang his soul to the three purities stone before the scroll painting opened. However, his soul was still in the constant glory stage. Although his soul of light had 9 holy soul imprints, it was still nothing compared to his physical body. Thus, he needed to be careful. Before he went to the blooming jade stage, he had sent someone to ask Elizabeth about the situation in the place. Once he confirmed that everything was fine, he headed for the blooming jade stage from the constant glory stage. The moment he arrived in the snowy and icy world, he saw that many other shore creatures neatly stood in front of him and bowed to him, while Elizabeth stood at the side as she quietly stared at him. The other shore creatures always looked down on the creatures that were in the form of souls on the other shore. During so many years, Zen's soul was probably the only one that enjoyed a better treatment. "What are you doing?" Zen asked as he looked back at Elizabeth. "We are here to meet and welcome you," Elizabeth said with a chuckle. Zen frowned and groaned, "You don't have to do this next time." "Okay," Elizabeth said nonchalantly with a shrug. She knew that he was quite tired of special treatments, but she only did so because of one thing. She wanted to show her ability and tell him that she could manage the entire blooming jade stage very well. As Zen's strength increased, the members of the Sun Crow race, such as Bagot and Micah, became worried. They felt that they were of little use to Zen. It was dangerous if they just stayed in the Oneness Sky Palace like that, since they might be considered insignificant warriors who would be sacrificed at any time. Elizabeth didn't think that Zen would do such a thing, but she understood the worries of the Sun Crow race. That was why she was very happy when Zen gave her the chance to rule over the blooming jade stage. She became completely dedicated to the task. Now that Zen had passed by, of course she had to display her capabilities. Under the protection of Elizabeth and the other shore creatures, Zen quickly crossed the blooming jade stage. The bald giant, Pompeo, also did well, but it was inconvenient for Zen to visit him in the form of a soul in that stage. Have all the other shore races in the entire blooming jade stage surrendered? Zen asked as he looked at the ice castles in the distance. Of course. A few other shore races that refused to surrender have been eliminated, Elizabeth answered quickly. You did a good job, Zen praised. But there's one thing you need to understand. Since I let you take charge of the blooming jade stage, it means I trust you. Therefore, you don't have to continue to gain my trust, he added. In any case, if Zen didn't trust Elizabeth at that time, he could have asked someone from the Oneness Sky Palace to take care of Pompeo. When Zen saw through her thoughts, her voice became lower. Okay, I know. Yet, she was not unhappy at all. She was a little joyful even. After all, what had happened was somehow another answer she wanted. There was no barrier on the way from stage 29 of the other shore to stage 32, so Zen's soul had a smooth journey to the Grand Plain stage. When he arrived at the location of the three purities stones, he found that more and more other shore races had assembled. All the other shore creatures that reached the Holy Soul Realm and obtained the myriad tribulations bodies already attached their souls and bodies to the three purities stones. They just had to wait for the Eternal Scroll painting to open. Once again, Zen entered his own three purities stone and sat upright at another corner. Not long after, his soul also turned into the same anchor body as the first one. Afterwards, he only had to wait for the Eternal Scroll painting to open as well. While he waited, the members of various other shore races arrived one after another. They were slightly confused when they saw Zen, and Zen silently observed them in return. 3 days later, the noisy crowd suddenly lowered their voices. Out of the blue, 3 blood-red balls appeared not far away. The blood-red ball was the most important symbol of the Nihility race. They were the only race on the other shore that could fight the element spirit race head-on. As soon as the red balls appeared, the air immediately felt oppressive. Although many races joined the Nihility race had brought much fear to the other shore creatures. Not only did they have all sorts of insane ideas, but they also brutally implemented those ideas. As the blood-red balls continued to approach, the other shore creatures avoided them. Even some of the Eternal Realm Masters didn't want to have a dispute with the Nihility race, so they stood up and moved aside. The warriors of the Violet Cloud race stayed thousands of feet away from Zen on the other side. When they saw that the 3 blood-red balls of the Nihility race had arrived, they got a bit shocked. The members of the Nihility race are coming. Will they do something against us? Even though the Violet Cloud race was a big race in stage 32, they were still very much afraid of the Nihility race. What are you afraid of? How coldly scolded them, and then cupped his hands towards the blood-red balls that slowly moved forward. Would you tell me why you came over to visit us? He asked. The Violet Cloud race relied on the Element Spirit race, and the Element Spirit race always supported them no matter what happened. Thus, how didn't find any reason to be afraid? Idiot off. Who visits your Violet Cloud race anyway? Is this your race's territory? A cold female voice inside one of the blood-red balls hissed. As soon as Hao heard the female voice, his jaw dropped. As an Eternal Realm Master who had traveled around stage 33 of the other shore, he was very familiar with that voice. It belonged to Samantha of the Nihility race. The Nihility race had 3 famous women, Samantha and her 2 sisters, Sienna and Stella. Samantha was the best among them in terms of strength and status. Now, Hao was a powerful figure in the Grand Plain stage, so he felt slightly embarrassed when Samantha rudely mocked him. Still, he gritted his teeth and endured it for the sake of his race. Then, he led the members of the Violet Cloud race to retreat to the side. He felt perplexed while they walked back. It seemed that the members of the Nihility race did not target the Violet Cloud race, so who could it be? Only the Three Eyes race was in the area they were headed to, but this race was rather average. In what way were they qualified for Samantha to have personally taken action? Aside from Hao, many other shore creatures also stared at the blood-red balls as they slowly moved. To their surprise, the 3 blood-red balls all stopped in front of Zen. Chapter 3386, The Reborn Evil God. Just now, the Three Eyes race was also shocked to see those blood-red balls rushing towards them. Except for the races that had submitted to the Nihility race, almost none of the other races on the other shore were willing to have anything to do with the Nihility race. The Three Eyes race had been thoroughly petrified, but they could do nothing aside from tensely watching the movements of the blood-red balls. When the blood-red balls stopped in front of Zen, the members of the Three Eyes race instinctively sighed with relief. Nevertheless, the confusion Egan and the leader of the Three Eyes race had in their hearts grew even heavier. Even though the opening of the Eternal Scroll painting was a big day, the Element Spirit race and the Nihility race usually didn't show up. Now, the Nihility race suddenly appeared, and they actually came for Zen. Are you Zen? Samantha's cold voice came out of the blood-red ball before him. The silhouette of a graceful woman could be vaguely seen in the red ball. Zen frowned. Yes, I am. Is something the matter? The last time he was in the Creation Myth Temple, Zen suffered a lot in the hands of the Nihility race. The experience didn't leave any good impression of them on his mind, so he naturally wouldn't bother to be courteous with them. Because they had come straight to him, he knew that their question was just to confirm his identity. They already knew who he was and was just trying to be certain, so Zen just admitted his identity outright. Someone wants to see you. After Samantha finished speaking, her blood-red ball floated to the side. The blood-red ball behind Samantha slowly floated forward and stopped in front of Zen. There was vaguely a human silhouette inside the red ball. Before long, a black-haired man came out of the blood-red ball. The black-haired man stood with a wicked smile on his face but soon laughed out loud. Have you ever thought of seeing me here? Upon getting a clear look, Zen found that the man was surprisingly the evil god. The moment the evil god appeared, many of the Oneness Sky Palace's Holy Soul Realm warriors standing behind Zen looked like they got hacked by thunders. Most of them, like Athamar for example, had seen the evil god before, so they naturally recognized him. This fellow had been swallowed by Zen, but why was he still alive? Furthermore, how could he become a member of the Nihility race? What baffled them the most was his form. The evil god's form was different from Zen's when Zen entered the other shore with his physical body. His entire features and even the details of his physical body could be seen clearly. He was actually an other shore creature. Zen was also baffled. The evil god's appearance here didn't surprise him. The evil god's form, on the other hand, came as a baffling shock for him. I've thought that you might become a member of the Nihility race, but I've never expected that you'd have a physical body on the other shore. Ha ha ha, the evil god burst into laughter again. He gently stroked his body with both hands, looking utterly satisfied. It's more than having a physical body. I've completely become an other shore creature. What? Zen raised his eyebrows. He thought that the evil god, just like Elvenia, obtained a new body by chance. If that was indeed the case, his new body was just like an armor that couldn't leave the other shore and had nothing to do with his body in the chaos. However, what the evil god just said completely shocked him and broke his conjecture. If you've become an other shore creature, what about your physical body in the source world? Zen asked curiously. Logically, after becoming a pure other shore creature, one couldn't have another body in the source world. If the two bodies existed at the same time, wouldn't there be two evil gods when the evil god of the other shore descended to the source world? I burned it, the evil god calmly said. I've burned down the evil god you created. The evil god standing before you now has gone through a rebirth. A few months ago, led by Sienna, the evil god went to a place exclusive for the Nihility race, the Chilling Bone Land. The Chilling Bone Land was a very strange area. Before the evil god went in, Sienna warned him that once he entered the Chilling Bone Land, he would transform into another creature and that he wouldn't be able to return to the source world. This way, not only could the evil god get rid of the restraints of the role of inner world generating avatar, but he would also have an extremely powerful body. The disadvantage was obvious. He wouldn't be able to return to the source world unless the Nihility race found a method for him to go there. Nevertheless, the evil god agreed without the slightest hesitation. Whatever the price was, he was willing to pay as long as he could get free from Zen's control. Before entering the land of bone tribulation, the evil god decided to return to the source world for one last time. In the source world, he dug a small tomb for himself, sat upright inside it, and then buried himself with his own hands. Not long after the evil god returned to the other shore, a wave of violent energy surged in the North Unicorn Province. If the North Unicorn Province was still in its heyday, many people would be alerted by this phenomenon. However, after a round of 9 Sun World destruction activated in the North Unicorn Province, the entire province had been destroyed and left in ruin. That was why, despite such a terrifying force of truth being released, it completely didn't attract anyone's attention. Whoosh! That wave of energy flashed past and went straight towards the tomb dug by the evil god. When the energy reached the tomb, the evil god's body inside it suddenly combusted. The green flames burned fiercely and quickly turned his body into ashes. However, the flames seemed to be restricted to his body, so the tomb was completely undamaged. The way the evil god became an other shore creature was completely different from what happened to Elvenia. In her case, she obtained a physical body, which would act as armor for her soul of light in special circumstances, so she didn't trigger the punishment of truth. What the Chilling Bone Land of the Nihility race did to evil god, on the other hand, was against the truth. Since it was something forbidden, it would naturally invite punishment from the truth. Zen stared at the evil god for a long while before he suddenly shook his head. You haven't become another person. You're the same evil god as before. What do you mean? The evil god frowned. Nothing has changed in my inner world, Zen replied shortly. The evil god was the incarnation of negative emotions in Zen's inner world. If he had really broken away from Zen and his real body had perished, the negative emotions would definitely return to Zen's inner world. So what? The evil god shrugged. At least, I'm free from your control. Only for the time being, retorted Zen. You are talking nonsense. The blue veins on the evil god's forehead bulged and looked like they were going to explode. The memories of the past left too deep of an impact on the evil god. Every time he fought against Zen, he always ended up defeated, something completely unacceptable for the extremely arrogant evil god. Realizing that he was losing his composure, he quickly focused himself. He said calmly, no one knows what will happen in the future. Maybe there will be a way for us to coexist someday. Once again, surprise emerged in Zen's gaze. During the time the evil god spent with the Nihility race, his personality seemed to have undergone a great change. At least, he was no longer eager to kill Zen the moment he laid eyes on him like before. So, what do you want to say to me? You can't be coming all the way here just to tell me about your current situation, right? Zen asked. On behalf of the Nihility race, I want to invite you to join us, said the evil god. The evil god's request caused an uproar among the crowd. On the one hand, these races of the other shore were afraid of the Nihility race. On the other hand, they envied the other shore creatures which were favored by the Nihility race. Since the Nihility race could become another great force that had the power to contend against the element spirit civilization, they naturally had their own unique advantages. For example, they possessed the chilling bone land, which could transform the creatures of the source world to the other shore creatures at any time, something that even the element spirit civilization couldn't achieve. Chapter 3387, Have Everything You Want. The one who controlled the chilling bone land had the privilege of choosing and recruiting talents in the chaos before anyone else. This privilege was only enjoyed by the Nihility race, though they were always known for being extremely picky. Those who were selected by the Nihility race were often outstanding warriors with terrifying and unique abilities, or their spokespersons in the chaos. Expressions of curiosity were plastered over the faces of the other shore creatures present. Who was this evil god? He was a mere youth who hadn't even reached the eternal realm yet. How was he recruited by the Nihility race? To think that he was also asking this other human youth from the Oneness Sky Palace to join the Nihility race. Of course, these things had nothing to do with the other shore creatures, but they strained their ears to listen out of sheer curiosity. From what you know of me, do you think I can be persuaded? Zen asked as the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. The evil god was born from Zen's inner world and he had been there for a long time, so of course he knew him quite well. In fact, it could be said that he spent most of his life trying to figure out how Zen's mind, as the god of creation, worked. Given his extensive knowledge of Zen's personality, the evil god was quite sure that it was going to be impossible to convince him to join the Nihility race. Any sort of sweet talking would only result in disappointment. The evil god shook his head. I know I may not be able to talk you into this, but I know someone who can. Zen raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by this sudden ace that his creation held. Pray tell, who is this person? The evil god smiled and took 2 steps back. As his toes lightly tapped on the bronze ground, he lay down on the blood-red ball and Zen watched as it slowly wrapped around his body and completely sucked him in. Buzz. After the blood-red ball which carried the evil god left, the last of the 3 blood-red balls slowly floated over. The first blood-red ball carried Samantha, the second carried the evil god while the third. A trace of curiosity glinted in Zen's eyes as he wondered who was within that third ball. Who exactly was this person the evil god was so confident in? His questions would be answered soon enough. A black figure began to slowly emerge from the ball, but when that person appeared, a strange aura permeated everyone's hearts. It felt as if their thoughts were being read and revealed to this newcomer. Every single Eternal Realm warrior from the Violet Cloud race, the Three Eyes race, and all other races revealed extremely shocked expressions. He actually returned to stage 32 in person. It's him. He actually came back for a mere human. Everyone was frozen in shock, still trying to find the logic in the situation. The one that caused all this hubbub was a young man, dressed in a gray overcoat. He had curly hair, and a somewhat sunken, unhealthy face with eyes that revealed a deep melancholy. He looked every bit an ordinary, if not famished, person. However, Zen could sense that he was by no means a simple person. There was just something extraordinary about him, that much he was certain. Nonetheless, Zen knew there was nothing to be afraid of and chose to speak first. Who are you? Whoosh. The mysterious youth's eyes wandered around before they turned to Zen. I am the Grand Master of Heaven and the leader of the Nihility race, he declared. Zen's body trembled at this sudden announcement. Grand Master of Heaven. He knew of this person's existence from the primeval Lord of Heaven. Shortly after entering the Creation Myth Temple, Zen was privy to various information about him. This so-called Grand Master of Heaven had been the primeval Lord of Heaven's junior fellow disciple and was also a member of the Nihility race. Of course that was then. Now, he actually introduced himself as the leader of the Nihility race. Some of the other shore creatures were also a bit shocked by how the Grand Master of Heaven introduced himself. The leader of the Nihility race. That meant he was one of the strongest existences on the entire other shore. What was more amazing was the fact that he personally went back to stage 32 just to convince this young man, who had yet to enter the Eternal Scroll painting, to join the Nihility race. A trace of embarrassment appeared on Egan's face. Grandpa, maybe this guy doesn't need me to help him, he mumbled shyly. Back in stage 13's dark region, he had already known that Zen wasn't simple. However, as another shore creature of stage 32, Egan still carried an air of arrogance around him and paid his suspicions no mind. In short, he didn't really take Zen that seriously when he met Zen again. But now, it was an entirely different matter. To think that the Grand Master of Heaven himself would show up just because of him. Zen was definitely no ordinary person. Yes, I didn't expect this, the leader of the Three Eyes race said with a cautious expression. He also did not understand how things came to this, but since the Grand Master of Heaven was involved, then this was no simple matter. After experiencing this short period of shock, Zen quickly collected himself and called for a bit of help inside his mind. Primeval Lord of Heaven, your junior fellow disciple has appeared. The Primeval Lord of Heaven rarely mentioned his fellow disciples, so Zen did not really know what was between them. Since the Grand Master of Heaven had come in person to talk him into joining the Nihility race, he thought it necessary to remind the Primeval Lord of Heaven. However, the previously talkative Primeval Lord of Heaven remained silent. Primeval Lord of Heaven, Zen called out again. To his dismay, there was no answer. Meanwhile, the Grand Master of Heaven smiled at Zen and exuded a gentle and elegant aura. It'll be useless to call him. He won't come out to see me. Zen's eyes widened in astonishment. You can hear my thoughts? He asked in a low voice. He communicated with the Primeval Lord of Heaven through pure consciousness, so there was no way other people would be able to hear their conversations. The Grand Master of Heaven shrugged nonchalantly. The Grand Plane stage has suppressed most of my abilities, so I can't really read your mind. Let's just say it was a smart guess on my part. Zen huffed in disbelief. You guessed. Since the Primeval Lord of Heaven refused to come out, Zen realized that he would have to deal with this matter on his own. He had already met with a lot of powerful human warriors these past few months, so he wasn't really that nervous in facing off against the Grand Master of Heaven. Besides, contrary to his grand name, the Grand Master of Heaven wasn't imposing at all and looked quite approachable. I wanted to invite you to our Nihility race. If you join us, you will have everything you could ever want, the Grand Master of Heaven promised. Everything? Zen repeated skeptically. Do you know what it is that I want? Zen left the Divine Land for the sake of the Nine Li race. However, after his trip to the Pear Hill, he realized that there were some goals that were still far beyond his reach. The world wasn't as simple as he had first thought, and there was the existence of another shore. It was just as the Snake Goddess said, the most urgent thing was not reviving the Nine Li race, but completing the finale way. Because if the chaos was destroyed, nothing could be done. Of course I know, the Grand Master of Heaven said, his deep eyes penetrating deep within Zen's heart. I can help you rebuild the Nine Li race and restore it to its glory. I can even make your grandfather Chiyu come back to life. I can make all that you want yours, so what do you think? If ever the Grand Master of Heaven followed his promise and revived Chiyu, the one he would revive was the Chiyu of this round of chaos. Such a feat was not easy, especially since the Nine Li race was a super force. It should also be taken into account that the Nihility race had to face pressure from the Element Spirit race. They truly wanted Zen to join them to have promised such things. Chapter 3388, Another Invitation. If Zen had been promised this when he had just entered the Source World, he would have agreed without hesitation. Back then he had quite a shallow understanding of the entire chaos, and reviving the Nine Li race was all there was on his mind. But now, his horizons had been broadened and his knowledge expanded, so naturally his goals had changed as well. Revive our Nine Li race and bring my grandfather back to life. Zen replied with a smile. As far as I know, there isn't much time left in the current round of chaos. So what would be the purpose of me reviving the Nine Li race? It will be destroyed with the ending of the chaos anyway. The ruling civilizations present all nodded in agreement. When a round of chaos was coming to an end, all within it became meaningless. All substances would disappear and turn into the most primitive energy of the Great Unity, and all that had happened in the past would be reset. Don't get too greedy, the Grand Master of Heaven continued, trying to persuade him. Even if the Nine Li race hadn't been annihilated but had existed up to now, they'd eventually be wiped out as well. The arrival of the finale of the chaos is inevitable and irreversible. When it comes time for the finale of the current round of chaos, the countless creatures in this round of chaos will all be doomed. He was right. Since the moment the chaos had come into being, this process had been repeated without exception. What if I can complete the finale way? Zen asked calmly and confidently. This amused the Grand Master of Heaven greatly and sent him into a burst of laughter. Even the members of the Violet Cloud race and other creatures on the other shore burst into laughter from not far off. Complete the finale way? He dares be so cocky. Even those of the Eternal Realm have all failed to complete the finale way. Young people like you are always lost in the clouds, dreaming. There were a considerable number of ruling civilizations within stage 32 of the other shore. They all had a great many talents, and some of them existed as those who had obtained the luck and resources of the chaos. They had put a great deal of effort in and had much more experience than Zen in completing the finale way. And yet they had all failed without exception. Their disdain for Zen was understandable when he began speaking so confidently in spite of all they had done. They all believed, without a shadow of a doubt, that he was overestimating himself. However, when the members of the three-eyed race heard Zen's resolute words, their hearts skipped a beat. These ruling civilizations that had once stood by the finale way had all been suppressed for too long. The three-eyes race had not turned to the nihility race or the element spirit race. They just kept to themselves, and this left them in the difficult position of having to defend relentlessly against the pincer attacks of the two major races. In the beginning, all these civilizations held their faith in the finale way, forming alliances with one another as well as the humans in an attempt to thwart the process of the chaos, and help the civilizations in the chaos complete the finale way. But since the humans had thinned out, they had been unable to disrupt the forces within the chaos. A long time passed and they had completely given up. The finale way became nothing more than an unrealistic hope to them. Now, Zen's mention of it in public awakened a flicker of their original intent and previous dedication. The Grand Master of Heaven was blunt. He had experienced more and knew more than Zen. He said, "You can't. That probability of pulling it off is infinitely close to zero. You'd do much better to seize the opportunity in front of you." "What sort of opportunity is that?" As the Grand Master of Heaven finished speaking, a white ball floated over from afar. As it came nearer, a female's voice rang through everyone's ears. When the other shore creatures saw the white ball, their expressions abruptly changed. This new presence floating in was from none other than the element spirit race. Those that had submitted to the element spirit race, such as the violet cloud race, appeared respectful, intending to welcome the member of the element spirit race graciously. The element spirit race had established the blood assembly in stage 32, which was jointly ruled by the famous Big Ten. This made those races wonder which of the 10 masters was on the way. The white ball approached, and when they saw the shape of the flame within it, the color from their faces suddenly drained. The other shore races dared not get closer to the white ball for a long while. Swoosh! By the time the white ball came beside the Grand Master of Heaven, the flames swirled around it calmly before out of the flames morphed a perfect body. It turned out to be none other than Claire, one of the few members of the element spirit race capable of coming into contact with the ice spirit. She held a status much higher than the so-called Big Ten. "Are you on holiday, Grand Master of Heaven? I can't imagine how else you'd have the time to come to stage 32 of the other shore," Claire asked with a cheeky smile. The Grand Master of Heaven glared at her in silence, holding back his aggravation. He said, "It is none of your business and has nothing to do with you." "Of course it does," Claire argued, turning her head to smile at Zen. She looked at him as if he was an exquisite piece of art. She twisted her body slightly and came out of the white ball, her flawless face close to Zen's. She was a fire spirit that would melt any substance that got this close to her. But by the laws in stage 32 of the other shore, Zen did not feel the tiniest hint of warmth. "I chose this person before you did. I have sacrificed many lives at his hands in order to see him more clearly," Claire said, smiling devilishly. She looked back at the Grand Master of Heaven and asked, "How could I now let you take him away from me?" "You have sacrificed many lives at my hands?" Zen asked in confusion, frowning intensely. "You mean those?" "Yes," Claire replied, nodding dutifully and looking at Zen with expectation and admiration. "Except for what happened in the Blooming Jade stage, I arranged all the rest." When Elizabeth had led Zen into the Blooming Jade stage, they hadn't taken the usually used paths. If he had broken into the lower ice field in the Blooming Jade stage, he would have surely gone through great difficulties before he finally stepped into stage 31 of the other shore. But instead, he passed by the upper ice field and released Pompeo, the bald giant. This caused the element spirit race to lose control of the Blooming Jade stage. "What was the purpose of all this?" Zen asked, horrified. "My purpose is the same as the Grand Master of Heaven's," she said, grinning. "I had to observe you to determine if you'd be a valuable addition to our element spirit race." Claire of the element spirit race extended an invitation to Zen as well. When the other shore creatures present heard the news, they burst into an uproar once again. The element spirit race had control of almost the entire other shore. They hadn't even seen the actual Eternal Realm talents as something special, let alone a talent who had not even entered the Eternal Realm yet. Then why did they try to recruit Zen so openly? Who was this human brat? How could two major races fight for him and dispatch their core figures to recruit him? All those present were utterly confused. Pierce, Auden and the others stood motionlessly not far away. They hadn't expected things to pan out this way either and were now a little more nervous. They weren't too sure if Zen would refuse both races. Chapter 3389, Zen's Choice. Zen's mouth corners curved up slightly into a wry smile. You've engaged in so much trickery. What conclusion have you reached from all your observations? The conclusion is plain as day. The smile on Claire's face slid off her lips, and she became serious in her countenance. Joining our element spirit race is the only path forward for you. I will ensure that you rank above the Big Ten in standing. Only 6 members have ever held this level of authority in our element spirit race. Claire's offer shocked the other shore creatures present into silence. The element spirit race had always been an enigma, and their governing structures and divisions of power had always remained unknown to outsiders. Even the primeval Lord of Heaven, who had led the human race against the element spirit race for many years, only knew that the leader of the element spirit race was called the Eye Spirit. However, the creatures of Stage 32 were well aware of the Big Ten of the element spirit race. After all their dealings in the Grand Plane stage were usually handled by the Big Ten. Would they really grant Zen a standing above the Big Ten if he were to join the element spirit race? This was an impossible thing to consider, and shock echoed in the hearts of many other shore creatures. Some of the weaker other shore races rarely had the opportunity to witness one of the Big Ten even if they joined the element spirit race. In local terms, only the Eternal Realm Masters of the major forces were qualified to attend the Blood Assembly. It was not hard to envision the true power and status of the Big Ten then. Is she speaking nonsense? What qualifies this human to be so valued? She must be kidding. Most of these other shore creatures were considering these and other thoughts in their minds. Although they disbelieved Claire's offer, they only dared to think so and would not risk speaking it aloud. After the purge way is successfully concluded, I will give you 300 places among the survivors. If you desire more, you are welcome to ask for more, added Claire. It was the plan of the element spirit race to delay the end of this round of chaos indefinitely. However, the only way to delay the end was to restrict the expansion of the chaos. To put it plainly, the plan was to purge all but 10,000 living creatures from the chaos while destroying the rest. Therefore, each of the 10,000 places for the survivors would be precious and highly sought after. If the purge way were really carried out, the value of 300 places among the survivors was priceless. With that knowledge, Claire still promised Zen 300 places among the survivors without hesitation and might even give him more if he wanted. This was a sign of her sincerity. 300 places among the survivors. Zen momentarily considered and gently shook his head. That's not sufficient for me. How many do you demand then? Claire asked as her eyes widened slightly in surprise. Nothing less than 10 billion will suffice, I think, Zen replied, shrugging his shoulders. He wanted everyone in the divine land to survive. 10 billion was probably still not enough. Wait, 10 billion is an impossible number because the degree of chaos will exceed our control, Claire answered earnestly as she pondered over Zen's demand. On second thoughts, she realized that Zen was pulling the wool over her eyes, and she immediately became enraged. I won't be joining any of you. I don't approve of the paths you have chosen, Zen said nonchalantly as he stared at Claire's angry face impassively. During my early days in the Source world, Master Athamar had disclosed the 3 paths of the future to me. He suddenly raised his chin and announced in a thunderous voice, the purge way is nothing more than a cowardly compromise. What is bound to come will inevitably come. You will murder everyone else in order to survive. What's the point of this? The nihility way smacks even more of a madman's balderdash. Those guys only want to drag everyone else, forget them. Zen continued, I don't know why the needle would descend to end the chaos, but just because it exists, we have no reason to stop fighting against it. I know that there are many other ruling civilizations present who have fought for the finale way, and I believe that this is the true and just cause. As for the purge way and the nihility way, those are nothing but the paths of evil. You are a shameless upstart to dare make such remarks. You haven't even reached the eternal realm. What gives you the right to run your mouth like that here? Elder Hao of the Violet Cloud race snarled at Zen. Hao was highly offended by the tempting offer that Claire had tried to seduce Zen with, and he was even more shocked that Zen had refused her without hesitation. It was simply inconceivable. He denounced Zen at this moment because he believed it was an opportunity to curry favor with Claire. Great speech, young human. If the element spirit race hadn't interfered with our efforts over the years, the finale way would have already succeeded. The element spirit race is to be blamed for the repeated failure of the finale way. They sabotaged our efforts. Following Hao, other shore creature also stepped forward to speak his piece and take a stand. This thin creature was from the Swallow Victory race. Like the Three Eyes race, the Swallow Victory race was not a mighty race, but they were well enough equipped to protect themselves at least. There were actually several other shore races like them in stage 32. They had all failed dismally at any attempt to complete the finale way. Young man, you are bold and courageous. Perhaps you will be the one who achieves the finale way. The leader of the Three Eyes race also spoke up for Zen. We won't yield as long as even the last shred of hope still remains. I agree. The other shore races who had supported the finale way in the past all now elected to back Zen's play. Emboldened, they were even prepared to face down Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven, and they didn't hesitate to declare their support for Zen. The faces of Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven both darkened as the scene unfolded. With the fall of the human civilization, these other shore races had also disintegrated. By necessity, the independent races like the Three Eyes race and the Swallow Victory race had all been forced to maintain low profiles because they lacked the ability to oppose the Nihility race and the Element Spirit race. However, if they were to unite under one banner, they would become such a powerful force that it could not be underestimated. Pierce and Auden were astounded by this sudden turn of events. They had never expected that Zen's words would actually manage to elicit support from so many other shore races. This sort of thing was simply unfathomable to them. All of you, shut up! Claire abruptly roared in anger. Her voice was so loud that it almost flashed like lightning through the air of the entire Grand Plain stage. The power contained within the sound wave spread out in all directions like a living entity, flowing uninterrupted as if it was water. Her formidable strength was obvious. That's a terrifying energy flow. Zen's expression changed slightly when he witnessed the surging energy. If not for the protection mechanism of the Grand Plain stage, the roar alone would have crushed a vast majority of the creatures present into powder. The other shore creatures were all shocked by this display of energy, and they immediately tumbled into silence. However, despite this the Grand Master of Heaven still appeared calm. Claire's anger was momentary, and a smile quickly appeared on her face again as she turned back to Zen. She would stay on her determined course of action, and besides that, she had already reached consensus with the Eye Spirit. Zen's refusal had humiliated her, but she still wouldn't relent. That's fine, said Claire, taking 2 steps back with her hands behind her back. I won't try to twist your arm in persuasion, but, in the end, I believe you will change your mind. Chapter 3390, On the Eternal Scroll Painting. With a loud sizzle, a terrifying flame suddenly rose from Claire's slender body, burning her to ashes. The scarlet flames floating in the white ball was her real body. The moment she turned into a ball of flames, a cold voice rang out yet again. Grand Master of Heaven, I advise you to give up. Just a word from you and you expect me to give up. The Grand Master of Heaven remained stoic. Even if the Eye Spirit came to me in person, he has no right to force me to give up. If the Eye Spirit were to come to you in person, he wouldn't stop until he killed you, Claire added. Over the years, the Element Spirit race and the Nihility race had fought quite fiercely both openly and secretly. The Nihility race hadn't declined, but had instead become stronger with each passing day. But overall, the Element Spirit race still held an absolute advantage. If the Element Spirit race really wanted to fight the Nihility race to death, they would most likely find themselves in a situation similar to what the human race had been in back then. The human race had once grown so powerful that they had become a threat to the Element Spirit race. But although the Element Spirit race had suffered a heavy blow, they had finally won. They had eliminated most of the humans, and trapped the outstanding human heroes on stage 33. Unfortunately, the Nihility race hadn't existed at the time. If it had, the Element Spirit race wouldn't have dared attack the human race at such great cost. After all, the fight between any of the 2 races would work as an advantage of the third one. No one would have dared do such a stupid thing. This situation was somewhat similar to that of the past. The sudden rise of the Nihility race had already threatened the status of the Element Spirit race. If the Element Spirit race fought despite the risk of suffering heavy blows, they might succeed in eliminating the Nihility race. There was no third great force that would profit from their fight. The other shore races that still stuck to the finale way weren't a threat in any way. The Element Spirit race had a psychological advantage over the Nihility race. But the Grand Master of Heaven was mighty. He had led the Nihility race from strength to strength. The Grand Master of Heaven remained stoic in the face of these threats. He replied calmly, "Then let's fight till death." There was grit and determination in the simple reply. Claire didn't say anything. The flames in the white ball trembled, but she had already left. The Grand Master of Heaven stared at Zen. He was also a very smart man. Zen's words made it clear that he believed in the finale way, and there was no question of changing his mind. It would be meaningless for the Grand Master of Heaven to stay here and persuade Zen to join the Nihility race. He had to find another way. Some ideas will change with time, the Grand Master of Heaven said slowly and then dived into the red ball. The 3 blood-red balls flew towards another direction. Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven had left, but the shock that they had caused still lingered. The final exchange between the powerful warriors of the 2 races had shocked the other shore creatures. Were the Nihility race and the Element Spirit race preparing to fight to death in order to win Zen over? It was a well-known fact that the 2 biggest races on the other shore had been fighting openly and secretly for nearly 400 chaotic eras. But both sides were scrupulous and had never come to a stage where they had to fight to death. And now their confrontation had escalated just because of a human boy who hadn't even reached the Eternal Realm yet. What did it mean? It probably meant that there was a reason why they thought Zen was worthy enough that they needed to fight until death. What was the reason though? The collective interest of the other shore creatures in Zen was piqued. Even Pierce, Auden, and the others from the Oneness Sky Palace were confused. They knew that Zen was important to the Oneness Sky Palace, but not to the point that 2 races were willing to fight for him. Primeval Lord of Heaven, what's going on? Zen asked, confused and helpless. The attitude that these 2 great races held towards him was beyond Zen's comprehension. He wanted an answer from the Primeval Lord of Heaven. The Primeval Lord of Heaven had been silent from the very beginning. He seemed to want to avoid the Grand Master of Heaven for some reason. And now that the Grand Master of Heaven had left, the Primeval Lord of Heaven returned to normal. He said slowly, as if he was mulling over his words, perhaps it's because of the 18 imprints you've obtained. The other shore creatures of stage 32 didn't know that Zen had obtained 18 imprints, but the Grand Master of Heaven and Claire probably knew about it. Because of these imprints, Zen said, even more confused. It wasn't a very convincing reason. As far as I know, the more imprints one has, the better they could handle everything in the Eternal Scroll painting. But back then, it was unclear whether the 18 imprints would cause other problems. Now that so many years have passed, many things might have happened that I do not know about. The Primeval Lord of Heaven knew a lot about the world, but he had been trapped on stage 33 for a long time. He didn't know anything about what had transpired in the past many chaotic eras. According to him, the problem was still in the 18 imprints. Everyone was absorbed in guesswork when the edge of the scroll painting in the sky suddenly became coated in a layer of gold. The scroll painting hanging in the sky of the Grand Plain stage revealed many different colors which slowly took shape and turned into silhouettes of different other shore creatures. Buzz. A circle soon appeared in the Eternal Scroll painting. It rotated slowly and before long, a long colorful ribbon had emerged from it. It twisted and turned into a huge vortex, filling the entire Eternal Scroll painting. The scene presented was magnificently eye-catching. Vortex. Of late, whenever Zen saw a vortex, he could not help but think of the abstruse energy world. Yes, it is connecting to some part of the abstruse energy world, the Primeval Lord of Heaven said, confirming his thoughts. As the vortex continued to fluctuate, the silhouettes that had shown up began to line up in an orderly fashion within the vortex. The vortex was made up of hundreds of circles of different sizes. The silhouette of the other shore creature that was in the innermost circle looked like a single ball. This ball was likely a member of the Nihility race or the Element Spirit race. The Primeval Lord of Heaven had once mentioned that the Ice Spirit of the Element Spirit race was ranked first in the Eternal Scroll painting. This ball was probably the Ice Spirit. A spider-like creature was ranked second. The Primeval Lord of Heaven explained to Zen that it was a spider spirit from the Star Spider civilization in the 96th round of Chaos. Its silhouette had been left on the Eternal Scroll painting, but its real body had already perished on stage 33. Can such a powerful existence that ranked second in the Eternal Scroll painting die in stage 33? Zen was surprised. The closer one is to the top ranks in the Eternal Scroll painting, the more outstanding blood power one will be able to obtain. But these rankings don't represent their full strength, the Primeval Lord of Heaven said. The Grand Master of Heaven never managed to enter the first 4 circles, but he still became the leader of the Nihility race. Chapter 3391, Pressed. While there were many ways to determine the strength of an Eternal Realm Master, the Eternal Scroll painting was the most crucial aspect. The Grand Master of Heaven was so powerful not only because he had obtained a unique bloodline power, but also because of what he obtained in stage 33 of the other shore. One could say that within the entire other shore, the 32 stages had many separate spaces, while stage 33 was a completely different world. That was the dome of the entire chaos, and it could even lead to the abstruse energy world. The scroll painting has already been unfolded. Everyone, get ready. Put your heavy stones into the 3 purities stones. The other shore creatures that had already put their souls and bodies into the 3 purities stones all pulled out their light stones to create white vortexes on the ground. Through these, they entered their own worlds of 3 purities stones. Zen followed suit, putting the heavy stone into the round hole at the center of the 3 purities stone. After the heavy stone was positioned inside, magnificent, complex textures began appearing on the surface of the 3 purities stone. The textures looked like the red-hot iron, converging toward the heavy stone in the middle. As the textures gathered, the heavy stone was ignited, turning into a bright red ball. With that, Zen sat at the last corner of the 3 purities stone, waiting quietly for it to help him enter the eternal scroll painting. While many other creatures were busy entering the eternal scroll painting, the swallow victory race, the 3-eyed race, and the other shore races all sent people to gather around Pierce. "Sir, would you happen to be Elder Pierce from the Oneness Sky Palace? And is this Elder Auden? I'm Florian of the swallow victory race. Can you tell me where Eastern Emperor Tai of the Oneness Sky Palace is?" In the past, the other shore races didn't think much of the souls of light of Pierce and his companions, but now they managed to pay a visit together and treat him with some reverence. Both Pierce and Auden felt rather flattered. The purpose of their visit was simple: they wanted to know Zen's identity. To do so, they even revealed their utmost willingness to support him. It was something that would have been almost unimaginable in the past. Back then, when Eastern Emperor Tai, the Snake Goddess, and the others tried uniting with the other shore races in Stage 32 of the other shore, all the races refused them. The other shore races had once tried their best to complete the finale way, but to no avail. After they failed in the end, they chose to stay in a small world within Stage 32 of the other shore, satisfied with managing their small territories. It wasn't that they weren't willing to fight back, nor that they were scared. Both the bad end of the human race and some other shore races had served as a lesson for them. But today, the attitudes of the Grand Master of Heaven and Claire offered them a glimmer of hope. Coupled with Zen's attitude, these other shore races felt they should gain a better understanding of the situation. Of course, these other shore races didn't make such a big deal out of it. Instead of showing up themselves, the leaders of the various races sent their members here. The other shore races remained under the pressure of the element spirit race. Pierce, of course, was unwilling to let go of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. While explaining Zen's origins, he also made some remarks to praise the warrior. Many Eternal Realm warriors remained within these other shore races. If they could gather, they'd form a great force as well. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. At this moment, a ray of straight golden light suddenly shot out from the 3 purities stone, shooting rapidly into the painting. The first ray of golden light shot out, followed by the second ray, then the third ray. The golden light was formed from the heavy stone embedded within the 3 purities stone. The moment the light entered the eternal scroll painting, it sent the other shore creature into the painting. Zen was sitting in a corner of the 3 purities stone. As the heavy stone grew brighter, the surrounding space began vibrating. A great gravitational force pulled Zen's body upward. Whoosh! The moment Zen entered the eternal scroll painting, it was as though he crashed into a solid wall at high speed. Or rather, he was hit by some sort of irresistible force. Regardless of how strong his physical body was, the power was unbearable. His entire body was pressed into a thin piece which was then imprinted onto the eternal scroll painting. And it was at this moment that Zen finally understood why the people on the eternal scroll painting were all silhouettes. As it turned out, they were also forcibly pressed onto the painting, becoming as thin as paper. Normally, this meant anyone's death. Even a soul that was squeezed to this extreme would dissipate. But in this situation, Zen's own consciousness and his physical body's perception were complete. His movements, however, were rather strange. Whenever he tried moving his hands, his feet moved at the same time, and vice versa. His body was then crawling horizontally on the eternal scroll painting like a crab. While he could move, Zen was a little morose. He felt as if he had changed into a creature of a completely different form. Primeval Lord of Heaven, is this eternal scroll painting turning us into a picture? Zen asked. You should have seen that before you entered the scroll painting. The Primeval Lord of Heaven had long anticipated Zen's reaction. What's the point of this? Both the Soul City and the Land of Bone Tribulation were built to strengthen the warriors through trainings. Was it necessary to turn the warriors into the painting for them to reach the eternal realm and become eternal warriors? The point. The Primeval Lord of Heaven took a moment of thought before continuing, perhaps this is another way to enter the abstruse energy world. Apart from the stage 33 of the other shore and the cave in the deleting space, there was no other way to enter the abstruse energy world, let alone the transmission method. But if warriors obtained their own bloodline theurgy in the eternal scroll painting, it indicated that they had already left the chaos. It might be a different means of transmission, but the warriors had to be pressed flat beforehand. Of course, the instant civilization wasn't going to do anything meaningless. The primeval Lord of Heaven's conjecture was valid. After hearing the primeval Lord of Heaven's words, Zen attempted to nod when he realized he couldn't complete the movement. It took a while to get used to it, and then he managed to move his hands and feet at the same time. He wasn't moving too slowly, but as he crawled along the eternal scroll painting, he saw something slender approaching him from the distance. It was like an arrow, rapidly sweeping past Zen. After it was out of sight, Zen realized it was a member of the Violet Cloud race. "That's unfair," Zen shouted. The Violet Cloud members' bodies were suited to moving in this form, so they naturally ended up far faster than Zen. "You haven't seen the members of the Element Spirit race. You're going to find it even more unfair when you do," said the primeval Lord of Heaven, shrugging his shoulders nonchalantly. The bodies of the element spirits were ball-like. After being crushed, they remained in the same form, able to move freely within the eternal scroll painting. Chapter 3392, The Beasts in the Eternal Scroll Painting. There was never such a thing as fair in the world. Every creature had its unique form and its advantages in a specific environment. For example, a fish could swim freely in water, but it would die on land. Now, it was clear that humans didn't have any advantages with their forms in the eternal scroll painting. This was evident when Zen had no choice but to move awkwardly like a crab. From the outside, the eternal scroll painting looked like a single piece of paper, but in fact, it was 3 pages. Furthermore, all the pages weren't as blank as they seemed. In reality, there were many beasts inside them. There were many speculations about the origin of the beasts in the scroll painting. Some people said that the beasts in the scroll painting were creatures from the abstruse energy world, but the eternal scroll painting turned out to be more habitable for them. Others said that the instant civilization created the beasts in the scroll painting. Nevertheless, they were all simply assumptions. It wasn't long before Zen encountered a beast after he entered the eternal scroll painting. The beast looked similar to the silhouette of another shore creature. It wasn't that big, and it looked like a small wolf that was no taller than a human's leg. The second he saw the beast, it quickly pounced on him. The other shore creatures and Zen could only do limited things within the eternal scroll painting. It truly felt like they were embedded in a painting, as their movements were restricted. On the other hand, the beasts in the scroll painting had more freedom. In turn, Zen chose to counterattack directly. However, the whole battle was simpler and more boring than he had imagined. Zen immediately swung down the second the beast approached him. Although the movement felt awkward, he was still able to grab its leg accurately. At the same time, he twisted his other hand and tore the leg in half. The whole process went by quietly as if a peaceful scene silently played out before his eyes. The mangled beast turned into wisps of black smoke and swiftly gathered towards his body, then completely fused with him. When all of the smoke had merged with him, his whole body trembled violently. At the same time, a wisp of black smoke flew out of the eternal scroll painting and fell from the sky, then headed straight towards his 3 purities stone. After that, a black mark appeared on the intricate pattern on the stone's surface. Primeval Lord of Heaven, how many beasts do I need to kill before I can go to the second page? Zen asked. There was an important condition that one had to fulfill before they could go to the second page, and that was to absorb enough beasts in the scroll painting. I can't say exactly, the primeval Lord of Heaven said. The beasts on the first page aren't too powerful, and the black smoke you can absorb from them isn't much. If you only kill beasts of that size, then you need to kill about 4,000 to 5,000 of them, he explained. Generally speaking, there were only a limited number of beasts every time the eternal scroll painting opened. Therefore, those other shore creatures were in a hurry because they wanted to kill enough beasts in the shortest time possible. 4 to 5,000, that's a lot, he sighed. He couldn't help but feel a little helpless. It wasn't hard to kill the beasts in the scroll painting, but the problem was that there seemed to be very few of them. Those who didn't kill enough beasts in the scroll painting couldn't advance to the second page. Furthermore, when the eternal scroll painting closed, those who couldn't enter the second page would naturally be expelled, which meant they had failed. Yet, the price of failure in the eternal scroll painting wasn't too heavy. The heavy stone would simply be destroyed afterward. Besides, if even the Oneness Sky Palace wouldn't have a hard time obtaining a few heavy stones, then the other shore races could get more. That was why all the other shore creatures that had obtained the holy souls and the myriad tribulations bodies successfully entered the eternal scroll painting. As a result, the competition in the eternal scroll painting became more intense. Of course, the eternal scroll painting was not a safe place. Many people died inside it every time it opened. Some of them died because the beasts in the scroll painting had killed them, but most of them died in each other's hands. After Zen had killed the beast, he traversed through the eternal scroll painting like a crab once more. But he couldn't even tell his position because of his limited vision. He just moved in one direction. Moreover, he had been having bad luck. He only encountered a few beasts along the way, and most of them were quite thin and small. Despite that, he didn't let go of any of them. Overall, he only came across 8 beasts in more than 2 hours. One of them was a snake-shaped beast, which had even escaped. He chased it for a long time but eventually had to give up in the end. Meanwhile, many other shore creatures on the bronze ground observed the 3 purities stones on the ground. When the eternal scroll painting had opened, it showed the silhouettes of the masters at the eternal realm. That was the scene on the 3rd page. Since Zen and the others were still on the 1st page, their movements naturally couldn't be observed. Every time the creatures from the other shore killed a beast in the scroll painting, however, a black streak of ink dropped from the scroll painting and left a mark on the 3 purities stone. Every time the bronze ground was refreshed, one could see the progress of the warriors in the eternal scroll painting through observing the 3 purities stones. Most of the other shore races only cared about their own warriors' 3 purities stones. This time, however, a lot of the other shore creatures were focused on Zen's 3 purities stone, whether intentionally or unintentionally. It didn't matter if it were the other shore races that surrendered to the element spirit race or races that were neutral like the 3 Eyes race, all of them quietly observed Zen. Usually, anyone who caught the attention of Claire and the Grand Master of Heaven supposedly performed well in the eternal scroll painting, and it shouldn't be hard for them to reach the eternal realm on their first attempt. However, more than 2 hours had passed, but there were only very few marks of ink on Zen's 3 purities stone. That human guy doesn't seem to have any extraordinary abilities. Over 2 hours have passed, but he has only killed a few beasts in the scroll painting. If he continues like that, he'll soon be eliminated. Some creatures chattered among themselves in low voices, but Pierce, Auden, and the others from the Oneness Sky Palace still heard them. "What is Zen doing?" Pierce asked. Auden shook his head. "Maybe luck is not on his side today. I heard that the beasts in the scroll painting appear at random," he said. All the warriors of the Oneness Sky Palace who were present were at the Holy Soul Realm, so they couldn't enter the eternal scroll painting and had no idea what might have happened inside. Hiss, hiss, hiss. Just then, wisps of black smoke emerged continuously from the eternal scroll painting and quickly descended towards their direction. Pierce and the others immediately perked up when they saw the streaks of ink. "Have they finally come?" they asked in their hearts. A smile graced Auden's face as well. He knew Zen would never let them down. But as the streaks of ink continued to fall, they went towards a 3 purities stone nearby, which belonged to Walden of the Violet Cloud race. The members of the Violet Cloud race knew what the warriors of the Oneness Sky Palace were thinking, and they felt disdain because of it. One of them even sneered, "I was wondering what kind of extraordinary being he was, but he's a loser after all. Now he wants to challenge our Violet Cloud race. Could he even enter the 2nd page? Even if he did, he would only end up dead." Chapter 3393, A Smiling Face and a Crying Face. The members of the 3 Eyes race and the Swallow Victory race who stood nearby also saw Zen's 3 purities stone. Their facial expressions changed subtly as well. They thought that Zen would amaze everyone with his outstanding performance in the eternal scroll painting, and that was how things were supposed to go. To their great surprise, his performance was by no means outstanding. Instead, his journey in the eternal scroll painting was fruitless until now. For instance, the 3 Eyes race had a total of 3 members who entered the eternal scroll painting this time. One of them was the 3-eyed boy, Egan, who performed the best, while even the one who did the worst among the 3 of them did much better than Zen. Still, they didn't believe that the Grand Master of Heaven would be wrong about his evaluation of Zen. They thought that the reason behind Zen's poor performance was probably because it was his first time to enter the eternal scroll painting. In any case, it wouldn't be a big deal if Zen couldn't get to enter the eternal realm this time anyway. Most of these other shore creatures in stage 32 of the other shore had failed several times. Even the mighty warriors who were already at the eternal realm had also entered the eternal scroll painting multiple times, and some of them a dozen or even 100 times before. But because of Claire's and the Grand Master of Heaven's perception of Zen, everyone began to hold high expectations of him and believed that he would pass the eternal scroll painting in one attempt. They had never imagined that he would have performed so clumsily. Meanwhile, Zen moved leisurely inside the painting. Although he didn't know how the others fared, he knew that he had killed far too few beasts in more than 2 hours. However, it wasn't his fault since only a few beasts had appeared around him. That is. Just then, he suddenly saw a dark thing rolling not far away. It wasn't until he got closer to it that he realized it was quite a big beast. He felt slightly happy to see the beast. It seemed that he wasn't that unlucky after all. The moment he quickly approached the beast, however, 3 other shore creatures from another direction rushed towards it. The 3 other shore creatures moved aggressively. 2 of them pinned the beast down on both sides, while the other stabbed it. The dead beast turned into wisps of black smoke and quickly gathered around the other shore creature that killed it. It wasn't after they killed the beast that they noticed Zen, who stood not far away. Is that the human brat? Ha ha, he seems to have killed only a few beasts. I thought he was a big shot, but he isn't even qualified to enter the second page. He doesn't deserve any attention. Even though everyone turned into a flat picture, their voices were still transmitted in their original forms. Furthermore, the space allowed them to hear everything clearly. The more beasts they killed, the more black smoke wrapped around their bodies. Dense black smoke surrounded these 3 other shore creatures' bodies. On the contrary, only a small cloud of black smoke enveloped Zen. It was hard for those other shore creatures not to envy him back then when both the Nihility race and the Element Spirit race invited him at the same time, especially when he wasn't even another shore creature. He came from the chaos, but he could freely enter and leave the other shore. After they mocked him for a bit, they immediately left. Everyone was currently in a hurry to hunt the beasts, and no one wanted to waste their time. As soon as they left, Zen helplessly rolled his eyes. Even the primeval Lord of Heaven could not help but sigh quietly at his supposedly bad luck. It wasn't that hard to pass through the first page of the Eternal Scroll painting, and the beasts appeared at random positions. Even if someone was really unlucky, they should still be able to catch more than a few. Therefore, neither Zen nor the primeval Lord of Heaven thought that it was not because of bad luck that he hadn't encountered many beasts. Every time he moved towards an area with a beast, the beast would mysteriously disappear or move to another place. The same thing happened repeatedly for more than 2 hours. No matter how fast he traveled, most of the beasts had avoided him on time. However, he couldn't see what happened from his point of view. He could only blame it on his bad luck. At that moment, a huge smiling face floated above the Eternal Scroll painting. The face was also a picture, but it left the Eternal Scroll painting and floated in a special space. He seems to be a little impatient, the smiling face said softly. When the voice came through, however, the smiling face quickly turned into a crying face and the voice became rough. Do we begin to guide him now? The voice asked gruffly. Let's wait a little longer. There are too many ants that have flocked into the scroll painting this time. I want to kill some of them, the soft voice came back as the face smiled. Will they find out? The crying face asked. Do you think they don't know we exist? Those cunning men aren't capable enough, so they just want to make us help them. They're really dreaming, the smiling face snorted coldly. Then let's do something about it right now. At that point, the crying face stopped worrying anymore. On the other hand, a big black hand that held a slender ink brush appeared in the special space. The hand gently drew on the Eternal Scroll painting. Then a vivid beast came to life. This beast was much bigger than those that appeared before. Its face looked ferocious with its evil fangs, and sharp thorns covered its whole body. It wasn't like the beasts that couldn't defend themselves from the warriors. This beast was called the worm taper. It was quite rare to find, even on the second page. Furthermore, the creatures on the other shore always tried their best to avoid it. There was once a time that another shore race killed a worm taper, but at the price of nearly 40 members' lives. As the slender ink brush continued to draw, more worm tapers appeared on the scroll painting one by one. Not long after, more than 100 worm tapers filled the scroll painting. Go and eliminate at least more than half of them, the crying face ordered. In turn, the newly created worm tapers immediately scattered everywhere like spilled ink and looked for their prey. The competition among the other shore creatures on the first page was extremely fierce. Every time the Eternal Scroll painting opened, only 1/3 of the creatures were allowed to enter the second page, so that every beast mattered. 4 other shore creatures worked together and just killed a group of beasts in the upper left corner of the Eternal Scroll painting. Just as they were about to hunt for more, a black shadow suddenly appeared nearby. They got excited as soon as they saw the black shadow and decided to capture it. However, one of them felt that something was wrong. A chill ran down his spine when he saw how the beast looked like. That's a worm tapir. Run. The other shore creature who saw the beast had once been to the second page, where he saw a powerful worm tapir with his own eyes. He was confused, though. Why did a worm tapir appear on the first page? Of course, he had no time to know the answer. Once the worm tapir had targeted its prey, its body became erratic. Then, it appeared and disappeared from time to time. The worm tapir was also a picture, but unlike the other shore creatures who became pictures, it could leave the eternal scroll painting for a short period. The second it jumped out of the eternal scroll painting, it looked like it had disappeared when viewed from the painting. When the worm tapir fell back onto the eternal scroll painting, it appeared again. While the scene played out repeatedly, the worm tapir tore the 4 other shore creatures into pieces. Black ink, which turned out to be those 4 other shore creatures, blood, gushed out from their mutilated limbs and flowed across the white painting. Chapter 3394, Rain of Blood. When the 4 other shore creatures were killed, 4 blood dots simultaneously appeared within the eternal scroll painting. The moment those dots formed, the other shore creatures standing under the painting felt a sense of cautiousness creep under their skin. They all knew that once a dot appeared, it could only mean that someone had died. However, they couldn't discern who it was or which race it came from. With the forming of the dots came an uneasy sense of foreboding. It had been less than 4 hours since the warriors had entered the eternal scroll painting, and a death rarely ever occurred on the first page. As everyone stared at the dots intently, a sudden ray of blood light erupted from each one. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. They all watched as the 4 beams of light headed to the north, illuminating 4 3-purity stones. Standing beside the stones were members of the dull blood race. The dull blood race was well known within stage 32 of the other shore. Their expressions darkened when they realized what the rays of blood light meant. Those warriors that had died were incredibly talented, all trained by the dull blood race. It was nearly incomprehensible that they had died in less than 4 hours after entering the eternal scroll painting. What on earth could have happened in the eternal scroll painting? They should be on the first page. Why? Their questions went unanswered. Those of the dull blood race were struggling with the feelings of sadness and puzzlement while the other races of the other shore felt a keen sense of relief. It didn't matter what happened in the eternal scroll painting as long as the dead were not of their own race. An overwhelming amount of worm tapirs had been released into the eternal scroll painting though, so how could the other shore creatures be spared the same fate? It was not long after the first 4 deaths that 2 more blood dots marred the surface of the eternal scroll painting. As they watched the circles form, their hearts rose to their throats, choking them. What is going on in there? Since when was the first page of the eternal scroll painting this dangerous? I can't believe it. Another 2 people have died. They all watched with bated breath as the rays of light fell over another race on the other shore. Each face of the other shore race turned sullen. It had to be an accident. Dying on the first page may be rare, but it has happened throughout history. They're just unlucky. That's all. Throughout history, very few had died on the first page of the eternal scroll painting. And if anyone happened to die then, it was maybe 1 or 2. However, this time was proving to be incredibly different. As they watched the painting with rapt attention, dozens of blood dots began to rapidly appear. Most of the other shore creatures thought that this must be a mistake. After realizing it was not a hoax, the entire bronze ground fell into a deafening silence. The other shore creatures looked up to the sky with impossibly wide eyes, their mouths flapping open and closed as if trying to speak but no sound came out. This occurrence was so unexpected and crazy that no one knew what to think or say. Something terrible had happened on the first page. The newly formed blood dots hummed softly. Dozens of rays of blood light burst from the newly formed dots in haphazard patterns. When a beam of light touched a 3 purities stone, they all knew it meant that the other shore creature represented by the stone had died. There was an odd sound of disbelief that echoed through the silence. How could this be? Pierce asked, his voice wobbly with anxiety. Will Zen be all right? Auden asked in a much calmer tone. Look, a ray of blood light is coming. Libby suddenly pointed to the sky. The beam of light from the eternal scroll painting was barreling towards them. As they watched the light, the hearts of those of the Oneness Sky Palace skipped a beat. They could hear the humming of the ray as if a swarm of insects were hovering around their heads. At the last second, the light deviated slightly and landed on a 3 purities stone not too far away from them. That particular stone represented a member of the Violet Cloud race. When they realized the light was not for Zen, the Oneness Sky Palace breathed a collective sigh of relief. The death had not been Zen. Opposite of the Oneness Sky Palace's relief, the members of the Violet Cloud race felt heavy with their comrade's death. There had been 6 from the Violet Cloud race to enter the Eternal Scroll painting. Aside from Walden, the dead member was another who had been most likely to enter the Eternal Realm. Their sadness for the member was almost all-consuming. Once the rays of light had found their stones, the creatures of the other shore returned their gazes to the Eternal Scroll painting. So many had perished in a single breath on the first page, so they could only assume the remaining creatures were having just as difficult of a time. Unfortunately, their thoughts were proven correct. After a brief reprieve, nearly 100 blood dots began to litter the painting. When the blood light began to fall from the dots, a brilliant flash of white light burst across the bronze ground in the distance. When the relief sculptures on the bronze ground were renewed again, the other shore creatures shifted their gazes to the 3 purities stones of the warriors who had had their lives taken. The bodies that were anchored to these 3 purities stones had been torn to shreds and scattered all over the ground. Despite the Eternal Scroll painting already being disfigured by a bloody storm, the other shore creatures still within it were calm. The canvas of the painting was immense, and because the other shore creatures within it had turned into pictures on the Eternal Scroll painting, their vision was quite limited. They could only see a bit far ahead of them, so they had no idea how many had actually met their end. Zen found himself at a relatively remote position, so he was able to avoid the worm tapers with relative ease. As he glanced around for the beasts though, he paused and felt an odd sense of confusion fill him. The ground before him was covered in black. He thought that it might be a beast curling up on the ground. With a pleased grin, he charged forward only to discover what he saw was not a beast, but a torn picture, and the space was pooled with blood. This must have been another shore creature. How could he have been torn apart like this? Zen was slightly surprised. Primeval Lord of Heaven, didn't you say that there would be no danger on the first page? The Primeval Lord of Heaven looked just as surprised as Zen was. He thought for a moment before speaking, perhaps it is an exceptional case. Some of the other shore creatures are quite weak. Everyone here has achieved a myriad tribulations body though. How could such another shore creature lose to a beast in the scroll painting? Zen questioned, doubting what had been said. Nodding his head, the Primeval Lord of Heaven couldn't help but agree. Perhaps some beasts that shouldn't appear on the first page have appeared. It's a very small chance that it happens, but still possible. If that were true, then Zen would need to be careful. While the Primeval Lord of Heaven and Zen were analyzing the situation, 3 other shore creatures suddenly rushed over from afar. They had been able to kill a beast before Zen earlier. Zen looked at them a little closer, and realized they were screaming for help as they ran from something. The Primeval Lord of Heaven noticed what was chasing them before Zen did. It's a worm taper. On the first page. Zen, run, he called to Zen in warning. A worm taper. Zen hesitated, but he could hear the urgency in the Primeval Lord of Heaven's voice. He could see a black silhouette appear and disappear behind the other shore creatures, as if it were riding waves. It was moving incredibly fast, taking no time at all to reach the 3 other shore creatures. When the black silhouette crashed over the top of them, they were ripped apart at the middle. Their blood spurted out in all directions, creating a grotesque, abstract image. Chapter 3395, Special Care. Hurry up, the Primeval Lord of Heaven urged Zen. What are you thinking about there? Zen merely stood on the spot and the Primeval Lord of Heaven saw it fit to get him moving. There was no way to distinguish the corpses of the 3 other shore creatures from each other given that they were all covered with black ink. Hearing what the Primeval Lord of Heaven had said, Zen quickly mobilized and began to wildly run towards the opposite direction. Moving like a crab in the Eternal Scroll painting made it extremely difficult for him to run, but he was surprisingly fast since it was currently a life and death crisis. After killing the 3 other shore creatures, the worm taper turned its attention to Zen, who was trying to escape with his life. It straightened its body and only left 4 black dots on the Eternal Scroll painting. These dots were the projection of its 4 legs. Suddenly, the black dots disappeared. This was when the worm taper jumped into the air and lunged forward. What it actually did was move to a higher space in order to get closer to its prey. Zen witnessed it disappear every now and then, but every time he caught sight of it, it seemed to get closer and closer. A trace of helplessness appeared on his face. It's so fast, he whined, and the Primeval Lord of Heaven harumphed in reply. This is why I told you to leave in the beginning, but no. You decided to stand there and watch it approach. Zen was no stranger to crisis. Ever since he carried the human race's civilization artifact, all he seemed to face was crisis, after crisis, after crisis. Through it all though, the Primeval Lord of Heaven was always his source of calm and clarity. However, this didn't seem to be the case for their current situation. The reason he could be so calm back then was either because he had something up his sleeve or the trouble was so trivial that Zen would be able to deal with it by himself. This time, however, the primeval Lord of Heaven was at a loss. The moment Zen entered the eternal scroll painting, he was already a part of it and subject to its irregularities. It didn't help that his current form was very inconvenient. There was no way to escape from whatever crisis the eternal scroll painting was going to throw at them. The eternal scroll painting could be entered, but to leave it was a different story altogether. If some people remained trapped on the first page because they failed to kill enough beasts, they wouldn't be able to leave until the eternal scroll painting was closed. There was definitely no form of escape to get away from this worm taper. What should I do now? Zen asked in desperation. The distance between him and the worm taper was only less than 10 feet now. If it went on like this, then there was no doubt that he would die within the next few seconds. The primeval Lord of Heaven was currently trying to think of a way to help Zen escape his current predicament. What you can do is. It could not be denied that he was under so many limitations and there was only so much they could do to get out of this alive. There was a large part in the primeval Lord of Heaven's heart that he simply wanted to tell Zen to give up and resign to his fate. However, when he opened his mouth to tell him this, all that came out was one word: run. Heeding this advice, Zen rushed forward and tried to create more distance between him and his pursuer. At that point, the worm taper was already less than a foot away. Its next leap would no doubt reach him. From the corner of Zen's eye, the worm taper disappeared once again. Having noticed this, Zen stopped abruptly and ran in the opposite direction. Sure, the worm taper might be able to bridge distances using its method, but there was no way it would be able to predict Zen's movements. This was only a temporary strategy to his problem, but whatever bought him time was a welcome solution. To his relief, this strategy actually worked. As the worm taper reappeared, it suddenly pounced towards Zen's original spot only to find him already gone. Just as it was about to turn its head, a huge, black hand suddenly appeared out of nowhere and snatched it in the air. A crying face also appeared above the eternal scroll painting and announced a gloomy warning. You can kill anyone else but him. The hand seemed to have humbled the worm taper, who now curled up like a docile kitten. The hand lightly tossed the worm taper away, who then fell into another place within the eternal scroll painting where two other shore creatures were staying. Aau! With a loud roar, the worm taper revealed its ferocious tusks and began to rampage once again. On the other hand, Zen continued to run. His strategy might have worked, but the fight wasn't over yet. He still needed to make sure he was safely at a distance. Once the worm taper landed, it would no doubt chase after him again, right? As he ran, Zen looked back just to see how far away the worm taper was, this time only to find it already gone. It had completely disappeared. Primeval Lord of Heaven, where did it go? I haven't the slightest idea, the primeval Lord of Heaven replied, also looking around for any sign of the worm taper. Could it be? Zen muttered. Did it fall somewhere else when it pounced? The primeval Lord of Heaven shook his head and huffed. Impossible. The eternal scroll painting is a flat plane. Where could it have fallen into? Despite their misgivings, there was no way for them to know where the worm taper went. At least Zen managed to stay alive. Having survived this nightmare, Zen chose not to linger and continued ambling towards the direction he was headed to. He, unfortunately, still did not encounter any beasts along the way, though he did see quite a number of dead other shore creatures. They were either miserable pools of black ooze or scattered body parts all over the eternal scroll painting. Were they all killed by that worm taper? Zen wondered out loud as he looked at all the strewn bodies. Was it even possible for the worm taper to have caused all this carnage? Even if it could move really fast and had a large range of motion, there was no way it could have killed all these other shore creatures in such a short period of time. There was only one explanation for all of this. There was more than one worm taper here. Just as Zen came to this conclusion, a long, thin silhouette emerged from a distance. It was a member of the violet cloud race. Among all other shore creatures, the violet cloud race was the fastest. Despite their agility, however, they were still no match for the worm taper. Since it was fast, the warrior of the violet cloud race managed to outrun the worm taper, but it also caught the attention of 5 to 6 more. These worm tapers followed behind the poor warrior so closely that Zen was completely ignored. The massacre continued for about 10 more minutes, and the crying face above soon turned into the smiling one. Ah, many of them have been cleared away. It originally wanted to eliminate more than half of other shore creatures, but a lot more perished during the disaster. If the worm tapers didn't stop killing, then it was only a matter of time before all of the creatures were annihilated. With a wave of the huge hand, all the worm tapers ceased their murderous rampage. It was only then that the other shore creatures could breathe a sigh of relief. What should we do next? The smiling face asked. Should we start guiding him now? Or should we get him out directly? The crying face appeared and shook its head. Don't make it so obvious. Let him enter the second page first, it said. With that, the huge hand grabbed the brush and smeared it onto the eternal scroll painting. Beasts began to materialize within the painting and gathered towards Zen. This large pack of beasts headed straight towards him was greatly unnerving, but Zen soon found that they were of normal strength levels. He would be able to beat them with his abilities. Chapter 3396, the second page. Although Zen didn't feel comfortable with his current form, he could now make do with it as he had been like this for so long. The beasts that were rushing over him were much weaker than him. It didn't matter if it was big or small. The moment he caught a creature, he tore it up like it was just a rotten piece of hemp rope. The dead beasts were like ink on paper, soaring towards Zen's body and lingering around him. The ink dripped from the eternal scroll painting and turned into wisps of black smoke, shooting straight into Zen's 3 purities stone. He finally gets some black smoke, Libby said, happy at this development. Everyone from the Oneness Sky Palace knew that Zen was highly valued, and that his previous performance had been bad. The only thing that made them happy was that Zen seemed to have saved himself even though so many other shore creatures had died within the eternal scroll painting that had clearly turned into a bloody field. They hadn't expected Zen to finally begin hunting beasts in the scroll painting. Swish, 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 wisps of black smoke continued to gather, gaining speed with each passing minute. Gosh, how many beasts did he kill in one go? Pierce asked, panting, his eyes wide. He had never entered the eternal scroll painting, but he still knew a few things, thanks to the ancient books. It wasn't normal for Zen to collect the black smoke at such a fast speed. The other shore creatures that had originally held a keen interest in Zen had all chosen to give up because many people belonging to almost every other shore race had died. But now, the descending black smoke attracted their attention once again. What's going on with Zen? How is he so fast? Did he encounter a large group of beasts? So many people have died in the eternal scroll painting. Does it have anything to do with him? There was no doubt that there was something unusual about Zen's performance, and the eternal scroll painting that had killed so many people. No wonder people were beginning to connect the two together. But even Zen, who was in the painting, was dumbfounded. There were too many beasts that were coming for him and surrounding him, like lambs to the slaughter. Primeval Lord of Heaven, what do you think is the point of killing these beasts? Zen asked as he waved his hands to tear the beasts apart. The eternal scroll painting is also a trial. So what's the use of the black smoke? Both the Soul City and the Land of Bone Tribulation were well understood. The Soul City allowed one's soul to enter a new realm, while the Land of Bone Tribulation allowed one's physical body to enter a new realm, both multiplying one's strength. One usually entered the eternal scroll painting to obtain a bloodline, but what was the use of killing the beasts in it and obtaining the black smoke? This black smoke is a kind of medium, the primeval Lord of Heaven said. The place where people can obtain bloodlines isn't in the chaos but in the abstruse energy world. I believe you know how difficult it will be if you enter the abstruse energy world in your ordinary form. Zen had been to the abstruse energy world. He had lost himself once he had entered it and had lost track of time and space. It was as if he had become completely blind and deaf. The others were much worse than how Zen had been. If the bloodlines were really placed on the ground like treasures, the other shore creatures would either not be able to pick them up, or they wouldn't be able to understand what it was on the ground. But Jeffrey was obviously an exception. Transforming into the special form in the painting was only the first step. Fusing with the black smoke was the second. This kind of medium was a disguised test. The other shore creatures were also busy killing beasts. More than 2/3 of the other shore creatures had been eliminated by that group of worm tapers. As a result, more than half the competitors in the eternal scroll painting had been eliminated. The competition was really not that fierce. The remaining creatures didn't need to fight for the beasts. No one could say if there would be another group of worm tapers appearing on the first page. The best thing for them to do would be to quickly move to the second page before anything else happened. Wisps of black smoke continued to descend from within the eternal scroll painting and into the 3 purities stones. Zen's 3 purities stone was the most prominent of them all. The black smoke was like a pillar that stretched endlessly. This lasted for about 5 minutes. Zen didn't know how many beasts he had killed. The moment he was done fusing with the black smoke, he suddenly felt his body sink. It was as if someone had poured a massive amount of lead into his body. The eternal scroll painting's white ground began to sink, with Zen trapped within it. It took only a moment to go from white to black and then from black to white again. When Zen's vision was restored, he discovered that he was still lying on the eternal scroll painting, in the flat form. The second page seems to be no different than the first page, Zen said. Not at all. Go and have a look, the primeval Lord of Heaven said. Zen moved some distance before two lines came into sight. He found that these two lines outlined a road. Black thorns lined the road on both sides. These thorns were in the painting, but the primeval Lord of Heaven didn't hesitate to warn Zen that they would be fatal. Even without his warning, Zen wouldn't be so bored that he'd be compelled to step on them. According to what they had previously understood, since the first page of the scroll painting was a process of absorbing the medium, the second page must technically be a transition between the abstruse energy world and the chaos. Seen this way, the third page was already in the abstruse energy world. The key to decide what one could get in the abstruse energy world was on the second page. Zen walked along the road for quite a while. The two lines curved out in the distance and opened out into an open platform on which a few other shore creatures were already standing. Zen was not the first one to enter the second page. When the worm tapers had appeared, quite a number of creatures had already killed enough beasts. These creatures had been lucky to avoid the slaughter. The human-like figure standing on the left side of the platform was familiar to Zen. His forehead had an eye drawn on it. A three-eyed warrior. Zen was sure that this was none other than Egan from the Three Eyes race. You've also entered the second page. Egan exclaimed, noticing Zen. What's wrong? Zen said, noticing that the moment he entered the platform, all the other shore creatures, including Egan, surrounded him. Where are the other members of my Violet Cloud race? Why haven't they entered the second page? Tell me if you don't want to die. A member of the Violet Cloud race commanded. This must be Walden, Zen thought. Chapter 3397, The Brush Wielder. The other members of the Violet Cloud race. Zen repeated with a hint of hesitation. Yes, where are they now? Anxiety seeped into Walden's voice as he asked. They should all be dead by now, was Zen's indifferent response. Nonsense, snapped Walden. The Violet Cloud race's fighting capacity wasn't considered particularly outstanding among the many other shore races, but they held the advantage of moving freely within the eternal scroll painting. Even if something wrong were to happen on the first page, the people of the Violet Cloud race weren't likely to die so easily. Zen, how could anyone possibly die on the first page? Egan asked in disbelief. That's too questionable. I've never even heard of anyone dying on the first page, another shore creature echoed from the side. Taking note of the suspicious gazes on him, Zen replied nonchalantly, since you don't believe me, why bother asking? It seems you have yet to learn how to talk properly. Shall I teach you? Threatened Walden impatiently. On the bronze ground, the Violet Cloud race had confronted Zen. Neither Walden nor the other members had any intentions to befriend Zen. But Claire's kindness toward him had dumbfounded the Eternal Realm masters of the Violet Cloud race. If the Violet Cloud race wanted to kill Zen in the Eternal Scroll painting, they'd undoubtedly be subjected to Claire's utmost wrath. So before Walden and the rest entered the Eternal Scroll painting, Elder Hao had to remind them specifically not to attack Zen. As Zen had been so highly esteemed by the Element Spirit race, Walden was extremely envious of him. In spite of Hao's warning, Walden decided to teach Zen a lesson. As Walden approached threateningly, Zen raised his hands in a stance of attack. While Zen had never intended to get along with the Violet Cloud race either, he hadn't yet fully understood the Eternal Scroll painting's mechanism. He figured it would be wise to put aside any chance of conflict in the meantime. But if Walden launched a challenge, he wasn't going to hesitate to fight back. Just then, another shore creature appeared. It was none other than a member of the Three Eyes race. The guy was lucky enough to have survived the worm taper's slaughter. Egan, are you all right? While the warrior from the Three Eyes race did survive, he had witnessed a terrible amount of dead bodies torn apart by the worm tapers on the first page. It was undeniably a horrifying sight. It's you, Kirk. Of course, I'm fine. Why do you ask me that? What happened on the first page? While Egan was surprised to see one of his kindred, he was even more astounded by the frightened look on the other's face. Egan knew Zen rather well. He didn't believe the latter was the sort of person who would ever lie to them. Still, the fact that the other members from the Violet Cloud race all perished on the first page was far too astonishing. He couldn't help but be skeptical. But the concern that filled his clansmen pushed him to believe that something terrible had indeed unfolded on the first page of the Eternal Scroll painting. Walden stopped to stare at Kirk and waited for an answer. A great number of worm tapers appeared on the first page. Many people have been killed, including our brother. Kirk delivered the grim news. What? Walden and the other shore creatures were all shocked and slack-jawed at the news. It was well known just how powerful a single worm tapir was, as well as how terrifying an entire pack of the ferocious beasts could be. It was then that they realized Zen told no lies. What about my people? Did you see any of them? Walden asked anxiously. For a second, Kirk hesitated before replying. I couldn't quite verify that, but I did see 3 of their corpses along the way. 3 of them. Walden's shoulders drooped at that. This time, the Violet Cloud race had sent only a total of 6 warriors into the Eternal Scroll painting, but 3 of them were now confirmed dead. The other 2 were also likely to have died. Just as Walden did, the rest of the creatures began to understand the gravity of the situation. Once Kirk arrived at the circular platform, more and more other shore creatures entered the area, bringing in more information about the first page, further verifying Zen's and Kirk's words. On the first page, the other shore creatures had suffered heavy casualties. In the end, only about 40 of them survived and gathered on the circular platform. The number went far lower than any of the previous records. Because of the abundant brutal killings, a heavy and somber atmosphere blanketed the platform. Most of them kept silent if they could. Such a great catastrophe unfolded on the first page, so it was natural that they were dreading the second page. Now, they were wondering if they could even come out alive. At that moment, they heard a strange rustling sound out of the blue. A narrow line suddenly appeared out of nowhere in front of the circular platform. As it extended, it eventually formed a door. This door, did someone just paint this? Zen muttered to himself in disbelief. It's possible, the primeval Lord of Heaven agreed. The Eternal Scroll painting's form was already highly special, it was still uncertain whether it was in the chaos or the abstruse energy world. Meanwhile, for the one who drew the actual lines on the painting, it was a far more complicated matter. In the upper space outside of Zen and the rest's view, a huge brush drew on the second page of the painting. Once the door was completed, the brush moved upward, forming a long and narrow path. Once the path extended up to a certain distance, it connected to another area that turned into a maze. There's no need for it to be so troublesome. Just draw a path that passes right through the maze, grumbled the crying face. Then why don't we just take him down from the painting and send him there directly? The smiling face asked in return. Would that be too straightforward? While the crying face was clearly hesitating, it indeed considered the possibility. Snorting, the smiling face said, as the brush wielder, we've already done too much to help him. If we guide him right through the maze now, the consequences will be incalculable. Even if you're willing to do so, I will not allow it. The smiling face and the crying face were 2 separate souls of a single creature. All members of their race carried 2 souls in one body, their conversations were signs of the inner contradictions of a lonely brush wielder. If he dies halfway, all our previous efforts will be wasted, said the crying face with worry. He obtained all the 18 imprints. If he still fails, it means we're destined to fail as well. No one else can be blamed for that, the smiling face said decisively. And so the brush continued to extend upward until it reached the very top of the Eternal Scroll painting where a black vortex lay. From their point of view, there were numerous white dots of light flashing in the depths of the vortex. This black vortex was the so-called third page of the Eternal Scroll painting, something people could see in the Grand Plain stage. It was still white when they looked up at it from the stage, but the inside was actually black. Once the brush wielder connected the lines to the black vortex, they seemed to get pulled into it. Then, the circular platform at the bottom began rotating slowly until the door opened with a tug. The door is open. I don't want to participate this time. Now that we've reached the second page, we must advance. Naturally, the many casualties from the first page had some other shore creatures grow hesitant to proceed. The trip in the painting was far different from the previous ones. Some decided to merely wait on the platform. Once the event ended, they'd be able to leave the painting safely. Since the other shore creatures could pass through the Soul City and the Land of Bone Tribulation, they all possessed outstanding wills and talents. Eventually, of course, most of them managed to conquer their fears and step into the door. Chapter 3398, The No-Break Maze. Behind the door, 2 straight lines extended upward, forming another long and narrow path. Walden of the Violet Cloud race no longer seemed to be in the mood to make trouble for Zen. He passed through the door and rushed to the forefront of the group. The other shore creatures all trailed behind Walden, following close behind him. On this occasion, the 3 Eyes race had sent 3 members into the Eternal Scroll painting. One of the 3 had died, which they considered quite a good result. The creatures from the other shore entered the door one after another. Once most of them had passed through, Zen moved forward in a strange sideways manner, waving his hands and feet. Egan and Kirk were the last to enter the door. They had intentionally waited for Zen to advance before them. However, when the two members of the Three Eyes race saw the way Zen moved, they immediately burst into laughter. Egan said, grinning, "Zen, we have a better way of moving in this current form." He had found that Zen had been moving strangely since he entered the round platform. "What do you mean?" Zen asked. The members of the Three Eyes race were very similar in form and build to human beings. Zen thought that if Egan and his clansmen knew a better style of movement, he would be able to imitate it. Egan stretched out his hands and raised his arms. In a single motion, he slashed his arms downwards, and the motion propelled his body into the air. "It looks almost like you're swimming," Zen observed, his brows furrowed. "Yes, this way is like swimming, and it should be the fastest way," said Egan. "Your way, on the other hand." Zen stood with his arms outstretched, imitating Egan's earlier pose. He slashed his hands downward, and his entire body was propelled a good distance forward. He smiled. Egan was right, it was much faster and easier to move forward using these motions. "Primeval Lord of Heaven," Zen muttered. Zen was slightly put out that the Primeval Lord of Heaven hadn't told him about this way. He believed that the Primeval Lord of Heaven had to have known about it. "Well, I thought you were enjoying walking like a crab, so I didn't mention it," replied the Primeval Lord of Heaven with a chuckle. Zen rolled his eyes. He continued to slash with his arms, moving his body forward along the path formed by the two thin lines. After he had covered a lengthy distance along the path, Zen stopped to take a look around him. The round platform at the bottom was no longer visible. He gazed at the top, but nothing could be seen. A question suddenly arose in his mind. The path is enclosed by the two lines. I wonder what will happen if anyone steps outside the boundary of the lines. He thought. He decided to ask Egan. In fact, Egan had been waiting for Zen to ask such a question since they stepped through the door, for it was the first time Zen had entered the Eternal Scroll painting. "The path is not as simple as it looks," Egan explained. "Without this path, this area would be a dark, bottomless abyss. If you want to see for yourself, there's a place in the middle of the path where you can observe the abyss." "Observe the bottomless abyss?" Zen asked with interest. Of course, he was fascinated by what lay outside the lines of the path, and he wanted to see the abyss Egan had mentioned. Egan nodded. "Wait, and I'll tell you when we reach the right spot." They continued to move forward for some time. Finally, Egan came to a stop, and Zen could see why. The path had suddenly become wider. But they had not yet reached the end. They were at the midpoint of the path. Several small rings had been drawn in the middle of the path. Inside each ring was the outline of a hexagram array. Zen opened his mouth to ask another question, but Egan was already telling him the answer. If you stand on the hexagram array, you can see the environment that surrounds this path. There were 6 hexagram arrays in the open space. Most of the other shore creatures passed by without slowing down, seemingly disinterested in the arrays. Perhaps it was because they had already seen the abyss many times. However, as a newcomer, Zen was extremely curious about the characteristics of the Eternal Scroll painting. As soon as Egan finished speaking, he hurriedly went to stand on a hexagram array. Indeed, it was actually more accurate to say that Zen was crouching, not standing. After all, there was no concept of height in the limited dimension of the Eternal Scroll painting. In actuality, Zen was crawling slowly across the ground. When Zen had positioned himself at the proper spot on the hexagram array, he caught his breath, for everything around him had changed. Previously, his perception of the environment had been constrained. He could only see one plane of his own and the scene around it. But at that moment, Zen seemed to have returned to his original form. It was as though he stood on a long, narrow black bridge, surrounded by the darkness of an infinite, fathomless abyss. "Now do you understand?" asked the Primeval Lord of Heaven, who sounded like he was smiling. "If I leave the path drawn by the lines, I will fall off the bridge and into the abyss," Zen murmured, nodding to himself. While he stood on the hexagram array, Zen had regained a temporary freedom of movement, so he seized the opportunity to move his limbs as he wished. "To be more precise, you will find yourself lost in the passage between the chaos and the abstruse energy world," said the Primeval Lord of Heaven, to clarify Zen's answer. There were several notorious instances of people who had crossed the lines of the bridge, unable to resist their curiosity. None who left the path had ever returned. Once someone fell into the abyss, he would be lost forever. As Zen reveled in the freedom to move his hands and feet, he glanced down at the bridge. The lines on the Eternal Scroll painting looked exquisite. Egan and Kirk stood patiently on the bridge, waiting for him. From Zen's vantage point, these two members of the Three Eyes race were no longer comprised of lines. Instead, their own original appearances were imprinted on the bridge. Zen observed them, intending to withdraw from the hexagram array after a few more moments. But an unexpected chill suddenly lifted the hairs on the back of his neck. He quickly turned. To his shock, he caught a fleeting glimpse of a crying face floating in the darkness, staring at him across a great distance. "What's that?" he asked quickly. He was startled, and tried to catch sight of the face again, but there was nothing but blackness. The crying face had vanished almost as soon as it appeared. The primeval Lord of Heaven tried to see what Zen was talking about, but the crying face was gone, leaving only empty darkness behind. "What did you see?" asked the primeval Lord of Heaven. "A face," Zen exclaimed. He had only seen it for an instant, but he was absolutely certain of what he saw. There was no doubt in his mind that it had been a face. After all, he had seen it as clearly as he saw the bright lines of the path floating in the dark abyss. "Perhaps you saw something else," the primeval Lord of Heaven muttered. He had an idea that there must be some creature in charge of the eternal scroll painting. But if there was, then such a creature had not been seen in living memory. It had stayed hidden through countless chaotic eras. Why would that creature choose to appear just when Zen entered the eternal scroll painting? "I don't think so," Zen said. But he was beginning to have second thoughts. He realized that he had been in the eternal scroll painting for some time now, and it was not unlikely that some illusion had manifested in his vision when he first regained his original form. He glanced around, peering into the depths of the abyss, but this time he saw nothing but darkness. He sighed. With a shrug, he stepped out of the hexagram array. As soon as he left the array, he found himself prone on the ground again. The transformation between the two forms was not a painful process, but it was slightly uncomfortable. He felt awkward in this form. "So, did you see the abyss and the bridge?" Egan asked with a smile. "Yes, and it definitely seems like a bad idea to stray from the path," Zen replied. He decided not to mention the crying face to Egan and Kirk. The three of them lifted their arms and slashed downwards, resuming their forward motion. The hexagram arrays had been the midpoint of the journey, and they had made it through half of the remainder of the path when they came to a halt. To Zen's astonishment, the two distinct lines of the road had branched out to form an enormous, complex pattern. It was the famous no-break maze of the Grand Plain stage. Zen said nothing as he stared at the maze. He absorbed its vastness and complexity. In general, there was a real risk of getting lost in a maze, as anyone wandering through high-walled paths could easily lose their sense of direction and position. But that was not the case in this situation. The vantage point of Zen and the others was such that they looked down at the maze from the top of the eternal scroll painting, so although they could only see a portion of the maze, they could clearly see all the paths and passages within. From their point of view, the maze was only a series of lines. What was the purpose of setting up such a maze here? Chapter 3399, Poisonous Leeches. The other creatures from the other shore entered the no-break maze without hesitation, and Zen, Egan and Kirk followed in behind them. The maze itself was not complicated. Its purpose was not to trap and confuse creatures but to usher them through the tests the maze provided. If one was strong enough, he or she would be able to pass through and make their way to the third page to choose his or her bloodline. The weak, however, would be eliminated or die. The process of becoming a powerful warrior had always been this cruel. "Such a form does not allow us to exercise our true strength," Zen complained to the primeval Lord of Heaven. He could not even move freely now that he was in the form of a picture, and so naturally his fighting ability was reduced. Zen was not the first to complain. Other methods could have been employed for the purpose of selecting other shore creatures to obtain the bloodline abilities. A competition in an area of the Grand Plain stage could be held, or a trial could be set up in a place similar to the Soul City or the Land of Bone Tribulation. This would have been better, as in their form in the Eternal Scroll painting, it was impossible to show their strength. "Don't worry, you will not be in this form forever," said the primeval Lord of Heaven with a smile. "Remember the hexagram arrays?" "Sir, do you mean to say there are also hexagram arrays in the maze?" Zen asked, his eyes lighting up. Just a moment ago he had returned to his original form and he felt like a drowning man that had just climbed ashore. It was obvious he wished to fight in his standard form. "Yes, that is correct," the primeval Lord of Heaven answered, nodding his head. The reason the Eternal Scroll painting was designed this way was because of how difficult it was to build a passage from the chaos to the other shore. In the context of the vortex, even for that mysterious civilization, it was quite difficult to transport creatures one at a time. Perhaps it was the stubbornness of the instant civilization that had the trial still set in the passage to this day. It was because of this that, even though they were unhappy with it, every other shore creature that entered the passage would be compressed into a picture. It was true that when their forms were flat, their strength was suppressed. But even for an incredibly powerful civilization like the Instant Civilization, it was impossible to allow other shore creatures to maintain their true form throughout the passage. And so the hexagram arrays were created as a compromise. They had made their way through a fair distance of the maze when they came to their first fork in the road. Those other shore creatures made their choices quickly and moved on. Zen had learned that one could choose either path and reach the destination as long as one was strong enough to handle it. The difference between the paths were the beasts on them. Some of the other shore races had already learned the arrangements of the beasts and had their choices ready. As for Zen, his mind was totally blank. Zen, left or right? Egan stopped and asked. Well, is there any difference? Zen hoped the primeval Lord of Heaven would offer some advice, but he revealed that the arrangements of the beasts in the no-break maze changed over time, and so after so long, they would have changed too much for him to be of any use here. Of course there are differences, replied Egan. According to the last 10 openings of the Eternal Scroll painting, the right will prove more troublesome, while the left path is much safer. Then why did they choose the right one? Zen asked confusedly of some of the other shore creatures. Their choice didn't seem to surprise Kirk at all. The information different races have collected varies. Perhaps, for them, taking the right path will be easier. Since this is your first time in the no-break maze, you can follow us, Egan suggested. He might not have seen Zen fight with his own eyes, but he believed Zen must have some merits to be invited by two great races. Okay, Zen replied, accepting the invitation. Although it was possible for the primeval Lord of Heaven to lead him through, the Eternal Scroll painting changed constantly, not to mention, his impression of the Three Eyes race was good. They decided on the left passage and came across several forks in the road along the way. Every fork further divided the other shore creatures into different paths. 4 forks later and it was only the 3 of them left on this one. Now, 2 thin lines that twisted like waves formed the curves of the channel before them. There were many circular objects on the walls on either side and Zen didn't have the slightest clue as to what they were. Zen, I think it'd be best to walk faster on this road. The things you see on the walls are poisonous leeches. If we get caught by them, we'll be in big trouble, Egan warned. This was the most treacherous section of the road ahead. Once they passed through here, the rest would be much easier. Got it, Zen nodded. They made some preparations at the intersection and suddenly all 3 of them rushed along the curving passage. Zen changed his method of charging forward and could now keep up with Egan and Kirk. They all seemed to be swimming through a river course and made great strides in their advance. Just as they entered the curved passageway, the circular objects began breaking apart and worms as thick as arms poured out. They appeared to have wings and flew at them. It turned out the circular objects were in fact eggs containing disgusting worms. Zen followed closely behind Egan and Kirk, not forgetting to observe the beasts. Zen, stay close and don't fight these poisonous leeches. Even if you kill them all, more will just appear, Egan, who marched on the front line, reminded Zen. The poisonous leeches weren't very strong but they were large in numbers and highly poisonous. Thus, most of the other shore creatures opted not to choose this path. But then, Kirk suddenly yelled out in shock, Egan, there's something wrong with the eggs ahead of us. Egan saw the eggs and his face lost all its color too. The eggs on both sides of the path were slightly black on the surface. The white eggs contained ordinary poisonous leeches, while the slightly black eggs contained chill poisonous leeches. These were far stronger than the ordinary poisonous leeches. There had always been chill poisonous leeches on this path, but before, there had only been 1 or 2 at the end of it. They were difficult to deal with but not that big a problem if one could run fast enough. But now, they had only traveled a little part of the journey and had already encountered quite a few chill poisonous leeches. This was beyond Egan's expectations. All we can do now is to continue pushing forward, said Egan, gritting his teeth. They were almost completely blocked off by the leeches behind them, making retreat impossible. They were left no choice but to rush out with all the strength they could muster. A rush of cold spread from the black eggs when they cracked open. Zen, Egan and Kirk immediately felt the drop in temperature. Black chill poisonous leeches burst from the eggs and surrounded them. At the front, Egan and Kirk stretched their bodies out to avoid the group of chill poisonous leeches. But behind them, Zen had been stopped by the leeches. He was unable to pass through and one concern grew within him. Would his physical strength still be the same now that his form had changed? Chapter 3400, Eliminate. Now that Zen was in a special form in the painting, it restrained many of his abilities. However, it was still his body. He was formerly immune to all poisons, but did that change when he was in this special form? He wasn't sure about that, but he had no time to think about it now. As the chill poisonous leeches continued to come at him, he waved his arms in defense. "Egan, the chill poisonous leeches have surrounded the human," Kirk warned. "But we can't get back to him," Egan said in frustration. The two of them continued to rush forward while the black eggs on both sides broke one after another. They couldn't stop, since if they halted for even a second, the ever-increasing swarm of chill poisonous leeches would swallow them. They already had enough problems with fighting off the poisonous leeches alone. If they got infected with the venom, they were doomed. It was clear that the chill poisonous leeches would be one of their worst nightmares if they fell under siege. Normally, they were supposed to encounter only several chill poisonous leeches in the place, but the current number of chill poisonous leeches had reached half of the whole swarm already. They realized that it wasn't only the first page that changed, but the second page as well. In such a desperate situation, a moment of hesitation would naturally bring them to death. Besides, they weren't powerful enough to save Zen anyway. They could only charge forward. With a heavy heart, Egan turned his head during escape and saw Zen's figure had completely disappeared from his view. All he saw was a big ball of poisonous leeches, and Zen was inside. He supposed that Zen had died already. After the two members of the Three Eyes race ran for a certain distance, the ball of poisonous leeches suddenly moved. The worms continued to wriggle around it, then the ball slowly nudged forward. As the ball rolled along the path, it attracted more and more poisonous leeches to it. As a result, Zen couldn't see his body, let alone Egan and Kirk. When he looked down from the top, he only saw an increasing amount of poisonous leeches that continued to pile on top of each other and crawl around him. Then, he felt something sticky around his body. Fortunately, he was still immune to poisons in the Eternal Scroll painting. Even though the poisonous leeches repeatedly spat venom at him, he wasn't injured at all. However, the venom of the chill poisonous leeches made his body feel numb and cold. It seemed that the venom contained immense freezing power. It wasn't a problem, though, since the numbness only lasted for an instant. But as he continued to nudge forward, more and more chill poisonous leeches attached to the ball. Every time they spat out venom at him, he inevitably had to pause for a second. Therefore, he forcibly had to stop from time to time and moved at a very slow pace. Yet, the crooked passage was not long. Egan and Kirk in front of him managed to rush out before they got caught in the swarm of poisonous leeches. Both of them stood at the end of the passage and looked back, but they couldn't see what was happening behind them from their spot. "I don't think Zen will survive that," Kirk said after a while. "I know," Egan agreed and nodded. At the back of Egan's mind, he started to regret ever taking Zen along this path. Not only did he fail to help Zen, but he also led him to death. Guilt quickly overwhelmed him. "Let's go," suggested Kirk. Many creatures had died in this journey in the Eternal Scroll painting, and Zen was just another of them. The other shore races that had lived in the Grand Plain stage for a very long time understood that necessary sacrifices were inevitable. Egan and Kirk were fully aware that if they were not careful enough, they would die in the Eternal Scroll painting as well. However, no matter how dangerous the Eternal Scroll painting was, it didn't rob them of their desire to reach the Eternal Realm. No one wanted to give up entering the Eternal Scroll painting because of fear. On the contrary, all the other shore creatures cherished such a rare opportunity. "Let's wait a bit more," said Egan with a frown. Although Egan and Zen weren't very close, Zen's amazing performances during their two encounters impressed Egan. Thus, Egan still hoped that Zen wouldn't die that easily. Kirk sighed in resignation and stood beside him. They looked inside the depths of the passage until they saw a huge ball of poisonous leeches that rolled out of the corner. "The poisonous leeches," Kirk muttered, his eyes wide with shock. "What happened?" Egan asked. The scene took him aback as well. Before the two of them escaped, they witnessed the ball of poisonous leeches swallow Zen. However, the size of the ball of poisonous leeches now was far bigger than before. The mass of worms was tangled closely together, and the whole ball almost blocked the passageway. The huge ball nudged and stopped as it slowly moved towards the end of the passageway. It's Zen. He's still alive," Egan slowly uttered in realization. He survived so many poisonous leeches. And there are so many chill poisonous leeches among them. Kirk was also dumbfounded. They only knew of one possibility that could explain this: Zen was immune to poisons. "Retreat. He's getting closer to us." They suddenly snapped back to reality and hurriedly ran back. Zen was not afraid of the poisonous leeches, but they were. While they retreated, Egan growled, Zen, can you hear me?" Everyone who entered the Eternal Scroll painting still retained their senses. Therefore, Zen could still hear Egan even though layers of poisonous leeches enveloped him. "Yes," he replied calmly. "Are you still alive?" Egan asked again. For a moment, the stupid question rendered Zen speechless. But then, he asked back, is there any way to get rid of these poisonous leeches? Zen had tried to crush and kill the poisonous leeches. However, they were so slippery that he only managed to kill a few of them after a long time. There were probably thousands of poisonous leeches wrapped around his body, and God knew how long it would take to kill them one by one. Egan slowly stepped back to distance himself from the cluster of poisonous leeches. Then he said, yes, there is. Keep moving forward and then turn left at the corner. You will enter a room with a hexagram array. Once you enter the array, you'll be able to deal with them. That was the purpose of the hexagram arrays scattered around the no-break maze. Those who stepped onto the arrays would turn from a part of the painting back into living creatures, then they would be able to fight the monsters. However, this was probably the first time that someone had attracted so many poisonous leeches. In turn, Zen followed Egan's instructions and continued to move slowly. After he turned around the corner, he indeed saw a separate room on the side. In the center of the room was a hexagram array. He dragged the poisonous leeches hard and moved towards the array. The second he stepped on it, his whole form underwent a drastic change. He regained his original appearance as a creature, and so did the poisonous leeches. When the poisonous leeches were just a painting, they didn't look that disgusting. Now that they turned into real creatures, however, Zen instantly felt sick in the stomach at the sight of them. Oh idiot, go to perdition. He felt miserable at the thought of how long the disgusting creatures stuck to him. His body trembled in rage, and he released a tremendous amount of power. The great force sent the thousands of poisonous leeches wrapped around him flying in all directions. Then, his power formed numerous spirals that spread everywhere, and the poisonous leeches were sliced into pieces before they fell on the ground. Meanwhile, Egan and Kirk, who stood outside the room, watched in utter surprise. The path the Three Eyes race had chosen might seem easier than the others, but it was also full of dangers. A large number of the members of the Three Eyes race had died in the hands of the poisonous leeches. This time, though, it looked like the poisonous leeches had found their nemesis.